this meeting started. Actually, we can all stand because we're going to do the Pledge of Allegiance first. Pledge of Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thanks. Welcome everyone to the third of 4 RTM budget hearings. As many of you know, this is the first time at least we've done this in the last, I think we did this back in the early 90s, I was told one time, but this is the first time we've proceeded this with this procedure in recent memory, and I think so far it's worked decently. Tonight we are going to focus specifically on the Board of Ed budget, and also when that is complete we're going to move into the miscellaneous section, which we did not get to last Wednesday, and that covers the debt service, contingency fund balance, pension, retiree medical, risk management, and human resources. Now what we'll need for tonight is there a volunteer to take minutes? Is Ann Stamler? I don't mean to put you on the spot. I'm teasing. I don't mean to, but I just did. Would anyone like to volunteer to do that? And again, it's a very simple process. We're probably only going to have 2 or 3 presenters in the Board of Ed budget, and you don't have to record everything that was asked or discussed, just simply who the presenters were and that questions were asked, and anything in particular that you want to point out, you're welcome to. Is there a volunteer? Ann? Thank you. Appreciate that. Okay. So what we'll do is Dr. Title is here to present to us their budget and sort of the sequence of events that has brought us here, and any background that we need. And after, I think this is a 20-minute or so presentation.
That's how fast I talk.
Okay. And then we'll open it up to Q&A as we have in the past, and then we'll anyone who needs to address any issues or questions, we'll allow for that. So without further ado, I'm going to turn this over to you, Dr. Title.
Thank you. I haven't had a chance last year with the RTM to do the same presentation that we did for Board of Finance, Board of Selectmen. So if you'll indulge me, we're going to start with PowerPoint, which will be up on the screen back there, and we're going to pass around a smaller version of it. So if you want to take some notes or can't see that far. And then when we're done, I'll give a brief overview of where I think we are right now in terms of our budget. And this is the Board of Education's budget. So Mrs. Kong was here, chair of the Board of Education. So just on a sort of a big picture point, you know, it's a sort of like this is what you're paying for here. We have an excellent school system. We have a very comprehensive and rigorous program in a number of areas: academics, athletics, arts, co-curricular. If you've had kids in the school system or recently, you'll know that we really do have an outstanding school system. So I'm going to give you an overview of our program. Some I just put a slide up and let you absorb it rather than reading it all. Some of the indicators about our student achievement, some of the influences on the budget for next year. Some of those are positive influences in that the increases are less than expected, or in some cases are decreases. And then the program and service changes that are included in the budget. So if I just take you through each of the major academic areas here. In addition to our core program, we do offer a substantial variety of elective courses, and as you also see through all of these slides, we do offer quite an array of AP courses. That's been a conscious effort in the school district long before I came to open up AP courses to as many students as possible and we do have some AP results to share with you later. So this gives you some idea. I'm not going to read them all to you. You can browse. You'll get the idea of the breadth of our program that we have, particularly at the high school level. Math and science, you can see there that we offer 6 different AP courses. And of course, these are tremendous advantages to our students because they can earn college credit, they can get placed out of courses, or in some cases can skip entire years of school if they so desire, which makes their parents happy. World languages, although we do have a reduction this year in the times per week that the program meets in grades 4, 5, and 6, we do still begin Spanish instruction in grade 4. The choice of French or Spanish starts in grade 7. And we do offer 5 languages. Chinese is our most recent offering. And we are offering that at 4 levels, starting in the high school. French and Spanish, because they start in grades 7 and 8, we're able to accelerate students up into level 3 as 9th graders. So we offer 5 world languages. As many of you know, we have a really fine art and music program, strings instruction and band in the elementary, and it's quite the sight to behold. I happened to MC the Strings Festival a couple weeks ago at Ludlow High School. It was just incredible. There was 600 kids playing strings simultaneously. It was quite something. So we have a tremendous art music program, and that's part of what your budget pays for. Some other of the areas you may be less familiar with, some of these areas, business, family, consumer science, technology, education. A couple of these are taught at the AP level as well. In the middle school, family, consumer science, technology, education begin, and business courses begin in grade 9. We are noticing the business courses are becoming much more popular with our students for some reason. Next year we have a huge demand for business courses, so that seems to be on the way up. Some other program areas that you know we include in our budget, some are mandated, some are not. Comprehensive special education, of course, is a big part of what we do. Health, phys ed, our gifted program, preschool program for 3 and 4-year-olds, English language learners, that's growing as more and more students with those needs are surfacing in our school system. Library, media, theater arts. So, in overview, lots of activities that are included in this budget, that this budget helps to pay for. As you can see up there, large numbers of student participation in all of these areas. And our art and music and our athletes have won many awards. All right, so blur you some numbers here, but these are 5-year changes in the CMT. In each grade, the CMT is given. I'll do the CAP next. You can see that the big story here, not surprisingly, but it's worth pointing out that we're, generally speaking, 15 to 20 percentage points above the state average in virtually every area. You can look at Fairfield over the years by comparing the 2007 to 2011 numbers. So, for example, in grade 3 math, 5 years ago, 76.7% of our students achieved the state goal or higher in math, and this past year that was 82.3%. And that's actually been a steady progression up. You can see in some of the other areas when they approach up into the low 80s, sometimes they flatten out. Of course, we're always working to improve on all of this, but we are getting some really good student results, at least as measured by the CMT. It's not the only measure, but it's the one that's popularly out there. And if we just move along, grade 5, for example, you can see that grade 5, our greatest gains there have also been in math. We've gone from 82% to 87.5%. Math's a hot topic for us, so I thought I would mention that. You can see also in grade 6, for example, reading in grade 6 has shown us a really, really large gain over the last 5 years, but writing's been, sort of flat. So, but it's been flat at a pretty high number. But again, in all of these cases, you can see that we're well above Connecticut on this. So, again, I'll just go quickly through this. You have the sheets in front of you. We top out over 90 in reading in 7th and 8th grade, and those are up from around 80 5 years ago. And you can see 7th grade math's gone up into the 86 range, and so has 8th grade math. Capped, 5-year cap scores, nothing's perfect, including our cap scores. But you can see, for example, in reading, that's shown a slight, decline there. The state's also shown a decline, but that's obviously something we're paying attention to. Still about 20 percentage points above the state. We're about 20 percentage points above the state in reading, writing, and math, and actually on a relative basis, our best area at the high school in terms of outperforming the state is science. We're about 25 percentage points above the state average in science. So that's our 10th grade. Advanced placement has been a tremendous boon in the school system. This is 10, 11 years worth of data where in the year 2000, and this is a pretty much of a straight progression up. We've just about, I think, peaked out on this, but basically in the year 2000, 314 kids took AP courses and 4 times that many took them last year. We don't have 4 times as many kids in the high school, so a lot more kids are taking them. And yet, even with 4 times as many kids taking AP, the percentage of students getting a 3 or higher has gone up. 3 is generally it's a 1 to 5 scale. Generally, a 3 will get you college placement out, 4 gives you credit, although that varies depending on the school. That's sort of a standard benchmark of what percentage of your scores are 3 or higher. And when Newsweek does their ratings, that's what they use. So you can see how we've expanded the number of kids taking these AP courses, but the scores have actually gone up. That's the story on that slide. SAT results generally show upward motion and exceeding the averages for Connecticut by 40 to 45 points on there. We do really well. Our kids get into virtually every name, college or university that you could think of. We didn't strategically put like all the ones that RTM members went to on the slide, but we should customize this for the audience so people can say, aha, the one I went to is up there. I'll have to think about that next time. We have a very high percentage of students who continue their education, and most of those go to 4-year colleges, and all the ones you've heard of, and some you haven't. So to maintain this in times of fiscal reality, our goals for this budget were to balance the needs of this school system with the fiscal reality. We wanted, obviously, the instructional program I just showed you. We'd like to preserve that. We'd like to enhance it where we can, but basically preserving would be what we're really trying to do here. And class size is also a priority for the board and for me as we put this budget together. Wherever we saw we were going to need additional program costs, where it was possible, we looked for savings. And I'll show you a couple of places where that happened. It's not always possible. Sometimes you just have more kids. But wherever we could do a program adjustment, we wanted to do an enhancement. We also tried to find savings to go with it. Last year, we continued our investments in maintenance and technology upgrades. We did not reduce that when the board did not reduce that when the budget was cut, and we're continuing at those investments, including a new student management system, we hope, for next year. We have enrollment changes, some up, some down, but mostly up, and we wanted to address those, obviously. That's a priority. Wherever we have seen budget line items that have not been in line with our spending, we're trying to face the music on that and bring these budget line items up to the actual cost. You saw that last year if you were here when we dealt with our special education tuition account, where that budget had been overexpended for years and years, and it just became a place where people cut the budget when it never lined up, and we just had to deal with it. This year, we're doing great there, so we're sort of take your medicine occasionally on this. And then where we have our instructional initiatives going on, we'll need to provide the resources for those. So those are the big priorities. Here's the enrollment. As of October 1 this past year, 10,151 students. This is K to 12, does not include the pre-K, which is about another 125 students. But a lot of the pre-K is, we've increased that a bit, but that's a sort of a pay-as-you-go program. So to keep an apples-to-apples comparison, you can see that we're projecting at the elementary level, we are seeing a decline in enrollment. It's relatively small. It's about 37 kids down out of about 4,900, but we are projecting the need for fewer teachers at the elementary level next year, so we've adjusted that. It's in the budget. Middle school is really maxed out. Our 4 biggest grades for enrollment are in grades 5 through 8, so next year, 6 through 8. We don't see a huge change in middle school. The high school is where all the action is. The 8th grade is enormous. It's much bigger than the graduating 12th grade. This is between the 2 high schools. We're going to see a big number, and you're going to see a number like that coming through each year for the next 3 years, as this big clump of students that is currently in grades 5 through 8 makes its way into the high school. 4 years from now, the high schools will max out, all of the things being equal. So that's where our action is, and that's why you'll see the staff that we need at the high school level is greater than this year. So the total change is 94 students up, again, bucking the state trends entirely, where most people are seeing declines in enrollment. Fairfield apparently has figured out some magic potion to have students come here. All right, so from the enrollment, we're budgeting for 3 fewer elementary classroom teachers because of those enrollment changes. We didn't just roll them over and say, well, we had 245 this year, we'll have 245 next year. We're estimating 6 classroom teachers at the high school level budgeted for 12-13 because of these enrollment changes. And that's between both high schools combined. Those exact numbers will fluctuate as we move closer to the summer and we get the real kindergarten enrollment and we get the high school students signing up. But that's what the budget's built on there. Right now, that seems like in the aggregate, we're probably going to be in pretty good shape, but you never know. So influences on this budget. Obviously, the changes in enrollment, we have to deal with that. Our teacher contract that you all saw and analyzed at great length a couple months ago plays into this in a couple different ways. The teacher salary account goes up by 2%. There were some cost savings in the new contract. Those are factored into our budget, so the increased load, if you remember, we increased the teacher load at the middle school, the team size, we increased the load at the high school. There were some savings in course reimbursement. Those are all reflected in this budget, and in some ways all of that helps us, particularly compared to last year when we gave you a budget that was just about 5%. This year's is 2.6. Transportation increases due to additional runs, due to not the grandfathering, but due to the contract increase. We have a 3% contract increase in there, and that's factored into the budget. Custodial overtime, this is something we just never seem to have budgeted for accurately. This is in the take your medicine category. You'll see it in there. Lower electricity rates, I think you heard this from the town side. We're estimating that the lower rates that the town negotiated on our behalf will save us approximately $700,000 next year, and that is in the budget as a negative number. And we did not build the budget last year when we cut it. We are not building it this year. There are no funding cliffs. There's no one-time grant money that we used and now is disappearing. There were no phantom cuts last year that now we have to go back and restore all the money because we really shouldn't have cut that and we had to spend it anyway. So we reduced the budget in an honest way. We have not used any one-time sort of gimmicks to balance the budget like the state did, and so we can keep our number really, really low here. So the key areas that we're looking for improvements on, and we can pursue these with any detail you'd like. There is an explanation of all of these in the budget book, in the support section. Anywhere there's going to be a significant change in program or service, we have a couple pages or more of the educational impact and the fiscal impact of that. We're moving towards a different elementary education staffing model for special education. It relies more on teachers and less on paraprofessionals. We extended our math support last year to the elementary schools, if you recall. It was a priority of the board and mine. We are extending that support to the middle schools where we have none essentially right now, and to the high schools. We are proposing to add part-time clerical support at the elementary schools that don't have it. It's about $12,000 per elementary school. The offices have no coverage after about 1 o'clock. It's a customer service, safety, and just something that needs to be addressed. And after school time needs to be covered, and it's a very cost-effective way to do that. We have some new curriculum, and so we need funds in there for textbooks and materials. We have some additional money in our preventive maintenance program and our building envelope, particularly with respect to roofs and other parts of our buildings, and to try to get out ahead of some of these other issues, adding a plumber to the staff. We have, as the line goes, a big backlog in the plumbing department, which we can now work our way through. School climate legislation, the bullying legislation, although it wasn't supposed to cost us any money, the fact is it will. I know that's the state. Our new student information system, which will replace a cobbled together, very old system. This was mentioned in our operational audit. It's well overdue, and ultimately down the road will actually save us money in ongoing costs, but that's in here. It's in the tech budget. We are also spending tech money on expanding our wireless internet services to all the schools. We don't really have that, and more services to English language learners. On the staffing front, the overall thing, I'm almost done. We're going up by 94 students, but we're actually proposing 2.6 fewer staff members next year. It's mostly a trade-off between certified and non-certified. So the money doesn't equal out, but in terms of body count, head count, we're actually going down. So this wonderful budget has allowed us to deliver this wonderful school system to the town, and all of this can be yours for the one low price of 2.6%, which people tell me is the lowest increase the Board of Ed has requested in recorded memory. And that was, I don't know, 50 years or thereabouts. Going back as far as anybody could find them. So we really think it's a responsible budget, and happy to answer any questions about it. I do want to explain to you that we're not at 2.6% as we sit before you because of the actions of the prior boards. And Jeff, maybe you want me to go through this sheet now, or how would you like to handle it?
Yeah, I was just going to suggest at this point to just kind of walk us through, again, what you proposed and how it was debated and deliberated, Board of Selectmen, Board of Finance, and how it has ended up to us now in its current form.
Okay. Well, I've been at all the meetings. I'll do my best to relay it to you. We did put, although I see our copy machine needs to be cleaned, I thank Doreen for putting this together. This is Doreen Munsell, the new Director of Finance. Took the place of Bonnie McQuain. You're probably used to seeing Bonnie here. Bonnie retired. Doreen replaced her. So the budget appropriation for 11-12, you can see there, the current year budget, 145, 680, 350. I'm on this page, extra page. Okay. The Board of Ed budget, 2.6%. is listed there. That's the original budget, that's the number, and that's the budget that's in this book that we sent you. That was the one the Board of Ed approved. At the first cut was the first selectman's recommended budget to the Board of Selectmen was a reduction of $612,525 because of changes in the annual required contribution toward the pension. And the town has done, and I sat through this so I've become a quasi-expert, but I know just enough to be dangerous. The town did an experience study, and the long and short of it is the actuary said you don't have to contribute as much to make your annual required contribution to your pension as you thought, because we built this budget several months before the town. And so this pension information that we had when we built our budget was not known. We were going off of an earlier estimate that did not include the experience study. So we built our budget, we put the pension number in the way the town tells us to. We call Paul Hiller up, we say, Paul, what do we put in for pension? Paul gives us a number, and that's what we do. So the net effect of the experience study was the first selectman believed that the board could fully fund its obligations under pension, and this is pension only for non-certified employees now. Teachers, administrators, anybody who holds a certificate is not part of the town's pension fund. They're in state teachers' retirement. It has nothing to do with this. And that's the number that went to the Board of Selectmen. At that point, the budget was 2.18%. And that budget reduction for pension, had the Board of Ed gone along with that, I mean, the board would have to adjust this, would have no impact on our program. No impact on class size program. This is just a number that we put in. The Board of Selectmen then cut, in addition to that $612,525, $250,000. That got us down to 148,602,416. That number, the percent's not there, but that's almost exactly 2.00%. So that cut at the Board of Selectmen then went over to the Board of Finance. At the Board of Finance level, and actually the first selectman came and proposed that due to a better than expected financial condition of the town for the current fiscal year, that he would recommend that the Board of Finance restore the $250,000 that was originally cut by the selectmen. And the Board of Finance did that. And the Board of Finance, in addition, decided that the 525 cut in pension was too aggressive. And so they restored, both to the town and the board side, some of the cut, but not all of the cut that the first selectman and selectmen had made on pension. The Board of Ed share of that was 334,048. So those two numbers were restored to the Board of Ed budget by the Board of Finance from the Board of Selectmen, leaving us now with a 2.41% budget increase in front of you, where at this point the only decrease in it from what the board recommended is in the pension. So that's the number in front of you now as we believe it, and that's my summary of 3 hours of meetings on this where I've heard it, and I'm sure other people can weigh in, but that's where we are right now. There's a Doreen calculated, there's some other retirement payments that are carried in our budget above and beyond the pension, so that's really just an internal budget thing. For your purposes, the budget before you is the 149, 186, 464.
Thank you. I guess at this point, we can just begin to open up the questions. I am going to ask one that's just off the top of my head, and that is, there was $800,000 that was cut last year. Is anything from that cut back in the budget this year?
Well, let me start by saying that the cut was more than $800,000 last year. Just to refresh your memory, and this is the cut over what the Board of Ed proposed. All right. The cut last year was $2,825,491, of which the RTM cut $800,000. Okay, so the RTM cut was $800,000. There is almost nothing of that cut has been returned to the budget. Almost nothing in there has been returned to the budget. The only area where there was any movement was within the high school's allocations. You know, we give the high school an allocation for which to budget for their sports teams, for their supplies, and so forth. Within that, we had cut way back on uniforms. And the high school headmasters decided to, within their allocation now, to put that money back in. So there will be some money for new uniforms next year that was cut. Aside from that, it's a very small number. Aside from that, everything else that was cut is still cut. It did not get restored.
You mentioned Chinese as a new language. Is that new this year, or how many years is that?
No, it's not new this year. I don't know when it started. Can somebody help me?
3 years?
4 years ago? 5 years ago? Gary's saying 4, Jim's saying 5. So it depends what year you count. 4 or 5 years ago, depending on what you count this year, we started Chinese.
Okay. I'll just open it up to, yes, Representative Mottola, and I think what we can do is we get a microphone that... Okay.
Can you hear me? Everyone? I'll speak up. Can you just, in the budget book that we have, where's the custodial overtime line?
Representative Mottola, the speakers there are for the broadcast.
Okay.
They're not for the room, just so
wanna
you know,
pass
the
the
ones
mic
on the
down?
table. So
That's fine.
we may be passing this back and forth. Let me see if this one works.
We'll find it. Just give us a second.
That's fine.
I found it. It's on page 58. Under 64, Business Services. 52010 evening/sub/overtime. It's like an Easter egg hunt. Yeah,
So it's a $240,000 increase?
yes.
Okay,
And you can see the actuals.
right.
The actual in 10-11 was 680. We think we're going to be in the low 600s this year, and that's with a good winter.
Right.
So we really have not adequately budgeted in that line. And so, we just, and we do have, some ideas on, and the reason we're not sort of fully going up to the 600 number, 620, is we are trying to work with custodial association to come up with some ideas on how to cut that back. We don't know how many of those we can actually implement this year because they have to be bargained.
Okay.
But we are looking for ways to cut back on custodial overtime, but right now, we're still pretty much at the mercy of the current system. I will say that there is some of this is because we make our facilities available, to the town bodies, to public organizations, and often don't, charge the full amount for that. So, there's a good $100,000 a year of, overtime costs that we eat that really have nothing to do with Board of Ed. But, for example, when the RTM meets in there and goes past 11 o'clock, we pay overtime, but we don't bill you for it.
Sure. So what you're saying, Dr. Title, is that you're trying to find ways to reduce that figure, but it's subject to collective bargaining.
That's correct.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
David?
Dave McKenzie, District 3. Just want to comment. The test performance would be more helpful if we saw it against towns with the same demographic, as opposed to including the whole state, which is going to include Bridgeport, Hartford, and New Haven.
Right.
Are those available?
Yes. Dr. Rosado does a whole report on that we send out to the board in the summer when the results come out. So we do have that data, but for this presentation, it was only so much we wanted to
I
put up
understand.
there. But yes, we do have that
But
data.
I'd like to
We
see it
do.
myself if
Sure.
it's available.
Yes, we have it.
The other thing is, last year, I remember there was some discussion about class size, consideration of maybe increasing class size modestly in order to save some of the budget. Administrative support had gone up in the last 10 years at twice the rate of teachers and pupils, and whether or not that was considered. And how do we look in Fairfield on cost per student compared to other towns with the same demographic?
Well, the best comparison, because so much of your costs are driven by your cost of living and your geography, and we do have that information which we can share with you. It's in southern Fairfield County, which basically is sort of Trumbull south to Greenwich. We're the second lowest per pupil expenditure in this area. The biggest driver on per pupil expenditure are teacher salaries. The biggest driver on teacher salaries is cost of living and what the local area pays. So we're actually the envy of most of the school districts in the general vicinity. Those with similar demographics that are in lower cost areas have a lower per pupil expenditure than we do. We have some increases in class size in here. It's not something we really relish, but if you remember in the collective bargaining discussion, the teacher load at the high school level was bargained to increase by 5 students per teacher. The middle school team size was bargained to go higher. So both of those will have an impact on class size at the middle school and the high school level. The class sizes at the elementary level were following the same guidelines that we did last year. There was one change in the budget cut with respect to class sizes last year at the elementary level. It was the case that we had been using lower class sizes at McKinley compared to the other elementary schools because of the student needs here in this school. And while those are still lower than the rest of the district, the gap was changed. So we did increase class sizes at McKinley at the elementary level. But class sizes, particularly class sizes at the elementary level, have been a priority for the board for as long as anybody can remember, and it was certainly a priority for me. So we tried not to touch those at the elementary level. I remember last year when the discussion was about administrators, a large part of that had to do with in the last 10 years, several schools were opened. And you needed principals and assistant principals and housemasters and so forth. So when the second high school was opened, that's within that window. So that accounted for, a fair amount of that. But so class sizes are an issue, but they are going to start floating up at the middle school and high school. The elementary, it's a priority to keep them as low as we can. But they're still, you can have 25 kids in a third grade classroom. It's not like these classes are sitting there with 16 kids in them all across the district. And we have that data in the book. So, your take on that? Administrators.
Did you cover the administrators?
Yeah, that's largely a function of the opening of new schools in the last 10 years. Central office administration has not changed. As a matter of fact,
Thank you.
If you remember the famous operational audit, they said we should add 2.5 administrators to the central office, and that the administrative support of the central office had been declining relative to the increased student enrollment. So I think that's a fair characterization of where we are.
Thank you.
Yep.
Representative Palmer?
Hello. Yeah. So speaking of the operational audit, Dr. Title, just wanted to get let's say a final kind of update on it. What were some of the things that you enacted that saved money, and then what were some of the things that you some suggestions that you declined, and maybe you can share why they were declined?
Sure. We have a handout on that I don't have with me, so we'll send it to everybody. The Board of Finance asked that question at the end of their last meeting, and so it was one of these things where I knew I needed to update that, and I was avoiding it like a term paper that was going to become due, and just didn't want to do it. So I do have a printed document on that. If you remember, last March, I did an initial response to the operational audit, and there were a fair number of suggestions on that audit we did implement that took effect in the current year budget. Then there's some other ones that we are pursuing, and then there's some other ones that I just flat out think are not educationally wise. One of the big ones last year that I'll tell you I do not favor for educational purposes was eliminating the house plan at the high school. I just think that's educationally unwise. I would not recommend that. I don't believe the people who did the audit truly understood the house system and how it worked. And we outlined that in some detail in the initial response to the operational audit. But there are other factors in there, and there's some parts of the operational audit that we're not implementing that would cost the town money. We didn't put in for, they asked us that we should have somebody in the district whose sole job is to oversee instructional technology at an administrative level. It's not in here. We didn't think we could afford that this year. The student management system that's in our budget, that was in the operational audit, and that is in the Board of Ed operating budget, is within this 2.41% that you're seeing. It didn't go forward as a capital request or a bonded request. It's within the operating budget. So those were some of the big ones. They did make reference to trying to cut back on some custodial overtime, and as I just mentioned before, we are going to make efforts, to do that. But by and large, there were a fair number of the audit recommendations that we did implement, or certainly within the spirit of the audit implement, and there's some that I just think are not good, or they did not produce any savings that the audit team thought there were savings, and there really weren't any, so implementing it wouldn't make no sense. So I don't think we're finished with it. I don't see that as a final report on the audit. I think there's still some areas there that we will continue to look at, some of which may have no effect on the operating budget. we still run, by and large, a payroll every week. We really don't need to do that. That's not going to save us a whole boatload of money, it's not going to save us a position, but we're still looking at some of these antiquated practices that need to improve.
Within Dr. Tyler,
Yep.
you could provide us a summary?
Yes.
This book report you ever got to get?
No, it's
Or-
done. No, the book report's done.
You can get
Yes.
that to us, because I think
Yep.
it's a good question. It's
Yes.
a follow-up from last year. It was a big part of our deliberation last year, and it would help us to know kind of where have we gone with it.
It's on the website right now if you really look for it. Right? Go home and read it. So we everything, just so you know, there was additional supplementary information that and again, we didn't know how much to overwhelm you with, but everything that we provided in writing is on the website. If you go to the budget part of the Board of Ed website, you will see a lot of even more detail behind some of this information, and the audit response is up there. So, but we'll also, I'll send you, Jeff, I'll send you a packet and you can distribute it.
The original one as well, so that you can baseline for some of the newer members.
That's also on the website.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah,
However, you can consolidate that and email the links that I can
sure.
send everyone.
Yeah, I mean, you could actually, I mean, and you know, we've been very scrupulous about paying attention to every recommendation in the audit. I mean, we really didn't just throw this thing on the shelf and say, well, that was a nice $50,000. We've really taken it seriously. The initial response, I think there were like 73 recommendations, and we addressed almost all of them. And then the ones that were sort of left, they're addressed in this sort of update. But I didn't go back and re-say everything that I said in the first ones. So you actually can find on the website the original audit, the initial response, and then the sort of follow-up 1 year later thoughts on it. Yep, and I'll make sure you get those links, if not the actual documents. Yeah.
Thank you. Dr. Title, could you expand, please, on the special education changes to the budget this year?
Sure. I think it's worth finding a page on that for people to...
Well, it won't help me because I can't see the written words on the page tonight,
Okay.
unfortunately, but
Well, I'll explain it verbally, and I also have some folks here who can go into more detail, Mary, if you want, but... Right. So on page 137, those of you that want to follow along on the text, 137. And the change is that we're looking to intervene with struggling students at the earliest point, implement an intervention model, and provide support services within the general education setting for students with disabilities as much as possible. And have staff working with our neediest kids who are the most highly qualified. And so there's a trade-off here in favor of adding certified special education teachers at the elementary level, because they're the highest qualified folks. And the trade-off for that is a reduction in the paraprofessional staff at the elementary level and putting it in a logical formula, so to speak, that makes it fair across all the elementary schools. The previous way it was done was not really done that way, and so we had a group, special education, administration, the building principals, worked on how could we make this happen and not have this blow the budget up. And I should point out that this was something in the operational audit. The operational audit did recommend this, although the operational audit subtracted the costs for the reduction in the paras, but failed to account for the increase in the certified teachers. But the spirit of the thing was basically we agreed with. And so just as we did last year with the staffing, the elementary staffing for language arts and math, we divided the elementary schools into bands. You know, we have some elementary schools that are larger than others, and so based on the number of sections or projected number of sections, we have small schools, medium schools, and large schools, and based on that, they were given an allocation of staff. This does not affect the staffing in our specialized programs, the Student Support Center programs, which is in 3 elementary schools. They serve the children with autism who would otherwise probably be outplaced at a much more expensive rate. That staffing is not impacted by this because those are specialized programs. And so the distribution of teaching staff and the distribution of paraprofessionals is based on a formula which is based on the number of students in the school. And we also wanted to set this up in such a way that schools were not rewarded, for lack of a better word, for over-identifying special education students so that they could get more staff. The net costs of that are all listed here. So that's sort of a large overview, and I have other staff who could give you more details if you're
No,
interested.
thank you. I thought that the change in model was worth explaining a
Okay.
little bit more in depth to everybody on the body, but could you just give us some trends as far as elementary school versus middle school versus high school number of special education students?
I don't think our prevalence rate is a whole lot different at the different levels, but I'll defer to Andrea on this question. Andrea? You have a microphone.
The prevalence rate overall in the district is approximately 10.3%, which has been stable for now the past 7 or 8 years. However, we have growing enrollment, so 10.3% is a larger number of students than 8 years ago. Obviously, we identify students all along the continuum, so overall prevalence rate is lowest at the elementary level, but students are being identified as the years progress. But our overall prevalence rate is stable at about 10.3%, which is consistent with state and national numbers.
Thank you. Can I continue? Thank you. Transportation increases, you said that there was no cost increase for grandfathering, but is it true that there is an $800,000 expense for grandfathering this year, and that'll go away after this year?
No. The expense associated with grandfathering is a 2-year. This is year 1. Next year is year 2. Then it goes away. It was approximately $350,000 each year for 2 years, for a total of $700,000. So the $350 is already in. It's baked into the budget. Next year, in 12-13, it will be required because this year we are grandfathering in just the 6th grade moved in the current year. So 7th grade and 8th grade were grandfathered. Next year, 6th and 7th grade are in, the 8th grade is grandfathered. So in 13-14, we will see a reduction in our transportation costs due to the elimination of that transportation expense. At the same time, we have our bus contract up for bid. Bus contract, I just might as well point this out because someone was bound to ask it. Our bus contract has 1 more year to run. It expires June 30th, 2013. It has a 3% cost escalator built in. It's the final year of a 5-year contract. We are right now working with a consultant and with the town to develop bid documents for that. Doreen here is helping with that. That will go out to bid, and we'll come back so that we have that number wrapped up pre-budget next year. So there'll be 2 influences on the budget in 13-14 with regard to transportation. One is grandfathering will go away, and the other is the bus contract will be new. That could help us or hurt us depending on the market and the price of diesel.
If you look on page 17, and this is part what you've been talking about, in terms of part-time employment, it was my understanding the increase in the part-time employment was $112,000 was due to the second part-time clerk for each of the 9 elementary schools.
That's correct.
Okay. For one of the reasons I think for this, I happen to teach after-school programs, and so I end up at these elementary schools, and sometimes if a parent doesn't come, and it has happened several times, so there's no one to call the parent except whoever is the after-school teacher. And so I've had to stay there till 5 o'clock, and we finally found a parent. So I think one of the reasons for this additional part-time clerk at each of the elementary schools was to provide some coverage so that for the after-school programs that are being run, that there is someone from the school there that could help in case there is an issue. And so that was my understanding, but that's part of that, isn't it?
Yes, that's in
Yes.
that part-time employment. Yeah, I mean, that's, comes out to a big number because you're multiplying it by a lot of schools. But it's it's a very inexpensive fix because you're talking about part-time, non-union, no benefit positions, which we don't really necessarily like to brag about, but that's just how it works when you're working less than 20 hours a week. So it's a pretty cost-effective way to get the coverage in the office in the afternoon, the coverage for students that are returned from buses when there's nobody at home, and for those after-school programs you talk about.
And it's also my understanding that also included in that number is the overtime for the custodians,
That's
the
correct.
240,000.
Right.
I'd like to just address that one a little bit. One of the things I'm trying to understand is overtime strictly meaning like after school hours or weekend hours?
No, it's not just that. In fact, that's the nut of the issue we're trying to address with the unit. Because the past practice in the district has been that when we fill a custodial vacancy, so if a custodian gets a vacation day or something, we pay another custodian time and a half to fill that. Right? And while that gives you a qualified person, because they know the school, they know the building, they don't need any training, it's an expensive way to fill it. But because that's a past practice, we need to unwind that through collective bargaining, or at least come to a halfway point where maybe we can't get that number down to 0, but we can make a dent in it. So fair amount of that number are what we call fill absences. It's not actually people working past 11 o'clock or people working Saturdays and Sundays. It's a couple $100,000. So there's room to move there, but we just can't do it unilaterally.
Okay, thank you, because that's what I was just trying to figure out, what percent was our meeting use and other
Right.
communities, or was it another issue? And I
Right.
think you've addressed that.
Yeah, I mean, some of it is unavoidable. I mean, we lucked out this year a little bit, but I mean, when we get storms and things happen and boilers break, you call people in. I mean, there's a lot of overtime that there isn't much you can do about. But where we can address it, we're seeking to do so.
Okay, thank you. I have another question on technology. On page 147, which is the capital requests, for the replacement of PCs, I know that we should be finishing up the installation of wireless technology in all of our schools. Will we have that in all of our schools by the end of this school year?
It would be by the end of next school year.
End of next year?
Right. But let me make sure, and I think, is Nancy here? So the answer is yes.
Yes, because the reason I ask, there's a replacement of 722 PCs and 18 workstations, and I'm just curious, are those primarily for our dedicated computer classrooms?
Yeah. Nancy, I think you need to use a microphone.
As I was saying, the majority of them are for replacements. I believe there's 7 or 8 elementary school library media labs that are scheduled for replacement. And then there are a number of lab spaces in the high school, in particular Ward High School, and the 3 middle schools that are scheduled for replacement. Our replacement plan is based on the age of the equipment, and there's a particular model that we're looking at to replace. But yeah, they're all, for the most part, dedicated to lab spaces.
Thank you, because I was just trying to figure out if this was in conflict with our wireless technology program of moving out of like kind of dedicated computer labs.
We've taken a blended approach. We have some dedicated spaces that need to do specific things. At the elementary level, we have both laptops and other kinds of devices that, are untethered, if you will. And those are the ones we want to leverage with the wireless. But we always need something. We always need some things that are tethered. I'm not talking into it. There you go. Better? So yeah, it's a blended approach across the district.
This is it's a really tricky issue that I don't think most school systems are really confronted with, is to what extent do you sort of go full-blown wireless and with individual portable devices. In fact, I think there was an article about it on the front page, and they even registered over the weekend. So we're moving into the area, but we're not cutting the cord completely.
One more question. One more question on our food service program. I know that one of the changes that last year in the budget was to associate all the costs with the food service program so that they would be more self-sufficient. And I was looking at the cost. I mean, not that I like to spend more money, but 4 years ago when I was
This will be a
teaching, I had to pay, our students had to pay more than what our students are paying here. And have we thought about upping the cost of the school lunches?
We did raise the school lunches for the current year from the prior year. The placement of some operational expenses that previously had been in the Board of Ed budget and asking food service to absorb them was in the operational audit. This was another example of following one of their recommendations. We are, what are we, 2/3 of the way through the fiscal year, and when we get to closer to the end and when the Board of Ed considers the food service budget in June, we'll have a better handle on that. And it could very well be that just to meet our rising costs, we need to increase our lunch prices. We're kind of sensitive to that because we do have a number of families, in the economic times that it is a hardship. But the other factor we have to look at is the federal government has been passing with great zeal additional requirements on our food service program, one of which deals with lunch prices. And so we may be in a situation where we are required by the federal government to raise lunch prices, and we may have little choice in that matter. So we'll have that all sorted out in the next couple of months, but we do have all those costs that you reference in the budget.
I have a question about special ed. I have to say I'm a little surprised at what seems a high percentage, over 10% of the student population in need of those services. I wanted to know, I had a couple of questions. One is, what is the threshold, or how are children determined in need of those services?
We're going to have Andrea talk to this.
And the second question is, once they're diagnosed or in need of those services, do they come out of them? Are there children who are only there for a few years, or are you really there with it for the rest of your school career?
The Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, IDEA, is the federal law that governs children with disabilities. It's funding legislation, but that legislation outlines 13 categories of disability, from autism, students who are visually impaired, hearing impaired, learning disabled, emotionally disturbed. There are 13 categories of disability. Each of those categories has a very specific definition prescribed in law. So each of those categories has a threshold and a definition that's based in evaluation, an individually administered comprehensive evaluation. So we have students who are across that spectrum of 13 disabilities. So you have a student who is visually impaired. They have an individualized education plan that addresses both their ability to access the curriculum as well as having their visual impairment addressed, typically with, for example, Braille teaching. Might be a special education function, is a special education function for that child. So we provide a continuum of services for any student who is a resident in Fairfield. So The 10% prevalence rate is really very consistent with federal and state trends in the numbers of students or the prevalence rate for children with disabilities overall. Our growing trend is in the area of autism. If you've seen very recently, the NIH came out that autism is being diagnosed at a rate of 1 in 88 students, and that is pretty consistent. It's a consistent geometric progression of the number of students with autism and autism spectrum disorders. So that's the area that I think has been the most active area in the past 8 to 10 years. The other area that we have a higher prevalence, not higher than the average, but is a large prevalence area for us is the area of learning disabilities. And so when you look at some of the programs and practices that we've been implementing in the general education curriculum over the past 3 to 5 years, you may have heard people talking about scientifically research-based intervention, SRBI, or RTI, response to intervention. Those are models where we identify early students who are struggling. We provide early intensive intervention outside of special education to try to prevent students from entering in. So that's a piece of the puzzle that's helped us keep the prevalence rate at a stable rate. And then on the other side, very frequently students are dismissed from special education. It is a point of pride for us, certainly our early childhood center, where we identify students at 2.5 and 3 years old, provide them intensive intervention, and very many of our students go on to elementary school never needing special ed services again. On the other side, we do have students who have disabilities that will require specialized instruction throughout their educational career and through the age of 21, which is their right under the law. So all of those things are true. We work very hard to help students with disabilities access the curriculum at high levels. When you look at those CMT and CAPT scores, understand that that is with all of our students with disabilities being assessed under those same standards. We're very, very proud of some of that work. So our kids with disabilities do very well, and we're proud of that, and they enter into the workforce ready to be good, participating, tax-paying citizens, and we are quite proud of that. So.
Ann?
Health insurance. I'm sorry.
It's quite all right.
I am trying to understand the situation, so if I am incorrect in any of my statements, I'm sure I'll be corrected. The request for $16,622,772 was on page 141. It's also on page 19. That number was arrived at using a number of, using a formula, a number of suppositions or calculations. One of them being an experience of what claims are expected and having sufficient reserve to cover them. Am I correct so far?
Correct.
Okay. I understand from the last Board of Finance meeting when information was presented that had recently been received, that the experience changed. The claims level being received or expected was higher than anticipated. So that means this number now leaves you with a smaller reserve. Is that basically right?
That is right if all of that projects out into the 12-13 year on that same trend.
Okay. If
Right.
it does project out and your reserve is only barely sufficient or perhaps not sufficient to cover claims, what happens?
Well, first of all, even with that change that you referenced, the balance in the fund was still about 1.5 times what we call the IBNR, which is the
Right.
one of the bases. So we're nowhere near running out of money in that account. we requested this funding based on twice the claims accrual, called the IBNR. It's on page 141. The claims accrual for 12-13 is estimated to be about $1.8 million. We budgeted so that we would end up with twice that in the bank, so to speak. So that 3.7 is the projected cash balance at the end of next year. With the figures that came out most recently, that number was going to come down to about $3 million. So even with that experience rate, you're still talking about a $3 million cash balance in that account. This fund periodically, after the board has set its budget, has gone the other way. And we've ended up with money well in excess of 2 times the IBNR in there. So this thing does fluctuate month to month. But we're not even close to being at the point where we have to worry about not being able to pay the claims.
Another arcane question. As part of your discussion, I believe you said that Aon had agreed to lower its trending percent based on the fact that you anticipated or were asking for 200% of the IBNR.
Correct.
So if it's now 1.5% or 150%,
150%, right.
Does that work backwards and impact the rate they would use and give you?
They haven't done that because that's just a 1 month
Okay.
move. So, a month from now, we could be back up to 2 times.
Okay.
So they don't go back and recalibrate it. And the other thing I think that was missing from that discussion, and, this all happened like at 5 o'clock or 6 o'clock on a day, and then that night, the Board of Finance was taking that up, and so some of these numbers were a bit of the back of the envelope. When the claims experience worsens, then the rate that we're charged is higher. It also means the employee contributions, which are based on that rate, are higher. So if our employees pay 20%, which many of them do, we would actually get additional revenue to offset that, and that was nowhere in the calculation. So we have to, and then, we're going to get another number in 2 weeks, and the thing can change again. So this is definitely a moving target. It's always possible for the Board of Ed, if it has money left, at one point or another, could always make a supplemental contribution into the fund. And the Board of Ed can always do that if it feels that it's, nervous about it. But at this point, that's probably not, warranted, given that was really based on a 1 month trend.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks. Those were not arcane.
Thanks.
Good. And I just want to point out, I believe the First Selectman's Chief of Staff said he was comfortable with the number that was in there. Am I correct in saying that? Yeah.
That's what I was after, and I got that from what you said. Thank you.
Right.
Any other members right now? I have a question. In the food services department, do you think we're doing enough to promote healthy eating in the schools?
Well, I think we do a lot to promote healthy eating in schools. Whether it's enough is in the eye of the beholder. It was, I think, 2 years ago, the board first adopted the healthy food certification by the state, which is a much higher standard than where they had been before. And with that adoption came several risks, some of which were financial, because a lot of the revenue that makes the food service program self-sustaining was derived from foods that you would not consider healthy. So even though the state was giving you an extra 10-cent reimbursement, which amounts to about $60,000 for us, there's a real risk you're running that the program would not break even. And I should say, this program contributes 100% of their real costs to us. Unlike other districts' food service programs that I've been associated with where they claim to, they're paying their pension costs, they're paying everything. So there was a risk there. Over the last couple of years, I believe the food service program has improved. I think we are offering healthier alternatives. I think occasionally there's choices on there people don't care for. It's an ongoing process. I think we're trying to do our best, but at the same time, there's some logistical issues around serving 10,000 kids lunch that you don't have when you go to Trader Joe's. And there's some financial impact to this, as well. So we're moving along well. We have a good advisory committee on this, and I think we're making a lot of progress. I was at that Healthy Food Expo last Saturday, the 31st at Ward High School, and I was really proud. Our food service program had a booth, and they were serving healthy foods just like all the others. So can we do more? Of course. But I think we're moving in the right direction. Some people would like us to move faster. Other people would like to see us return to having more cookies. So we're trying to balance it.
But are we still under that program you said where we're getting more revenue by
Yes, we are.
being forced to buy the foods that we wouldn't normally recommend, as you just said?
The healthy food certification requires that you not sell certain foods to students,
Such as?
such as things that are very unhealthy.
Okay.
Large cookies,
Okay.
for example, with large quantities of sugar and so forth. There's portion sizes. There's a lot of prohibited items. Certain kinds of pizza. You had to serve different kinds of pizza, and we're still under that. The Board of Ed every year has to recertify, so it's an annual decision. So last year in June, after basically 1 year in the program, food service director presented to the board, gave the data, the board discussed it, and the board voted 5-3 to stay in it. It was not a unanimous thing. There were some people that said, we don't want to do this, we'll make our own decisions. So this year in June, they'll have another chance to either re-up with healthy foods or throw it out.
Okay.
I recommended that they stay in, but, there's also, there's a whole continuum on this. There are people that think the healthy food certification, which is somewhat burdensome, doesn't go far enough. Right? And then there's other people that say, don't let the state tell you what to serve, you decide. We'll let the kids decide. Why are we making choices for kids and families?
But again, the benefit of going under that program is what? Tell me the benefit.
Well, one of the benefits is you get an extra 10-cent reimbursement for the lunches. And the second thing is it does hold us to a higher minimum standards for the quality of the ingredients in our food that otherwise would not be there. And so those would be two, of the advantages. There's some quality control there. But again, reasonable people can differ on this. It's not a slam dunk either way. I think the concept, though, that we try to model healthy foods in our cafeterias mirrors what we are teaching students in the classroom, in the health classes, does have some philosophical continuity to it. There is something to be said for, in the third grade health curriculum, we're teaching kids that, too much sugar is not a good idea, and don't eat all these potato chips, and then they go through the lunch line, and there they are. So there's some logical incongruity there that I think bothers some people, and this gives us that.
Okay. Yes, David.
I have questions on the technology side, so I don't know if you're director of technology, maybe might want to take some of them. But one of the questions I have starts off in the replacement of, it says annual refresh of computer hardware. So on the town side, they kind of give us general numbers of PCs, printers, monitors, things like that. But what we've been told is they actually, to salvage some of the older units, a lot of times they use parts, so those aren't realistic, exact counts of what they're really trying to do. Are you doing the same thing on the ed side, or are you more so really trying to say a classroom's been replaced? We know exactly how many are in. Every year we go and do that. Something like, are these more realistic unit numbers
Those
here?
are actual unit numbers. We do provide in those spaces that aren't designated, like the labs we talked about before. If they're in classrooms, for example, in the elementary school, we have a designated number of machines that go in each classroom. We give the administrators the option of whether they want to go laptop, netbook, which are the small computers or notebooks, or a desktop, because there is some instructional value in, picking something a little bit different. But other than that flexibility, the actual count of the number of units is pretty much on target. The only thing that would change is those numbers were built around the 1st of November, and obviously there are some machines that die between that date and today that I may have already replaced. So there may be some flexibility there. But, we're talking maybe, 10 units or something like that. I also say that our replacement plan, because we've had some funding issues over the last 6-7 years, we're a little bit more behind than the town is as far as the replacement plan is concerned. Our machines are 7 to 8 years old when we replace them. So do we salvage things out of them? Yeah, we salvage, CD drives and DVD drives and memory and things that make sense for us to grab out of them. But for the most part, when they're gone, they're gone.
Okay. And another question I've got, actually just more so general on the backup side. I see that you do have some servers, and you mentioned, with blade servers and when things go down. What is your backup plan? I mean, right now on the town side, they've got Fairfield Woods, and they've kind of replicated some of their storage there.
We actually have two
something?
backup systems in place. We have a backup system that takes all of our data, and it actually takes it off-site in the cloud. And that's replicated every night, every server, every piece of data. And that's something that actually was in this year's budget that we implemented last fall. The other system we have that we've worked in tandem with the town is our disaster recovery area for the financial and human resource system that we both share, and that's located at Burr Elementary School. We recently ran some tests on that and are working with Munis to perfect that. We need to do some follow-up tests, but right now everything's in place.
And that's just your data that goes to the cloud each night, or some variation of backing up, like a mirror of a server or something? Like if your main area went down right now, tomorrow morning, would you be able to be back up?
Yeah,
and
we'd
running?
be able to do a
You're in
full restore
position now.
to new device. Yeah, and in some respects, we could actually work off the servers that are in the cloud too. Depends on exactly what we're talking about, because we don't necessarily back everything up. There's lots of different kinds of data, lots of different kinds of files, and some of them are backed up to cheaper stuff, cheaper server storage than others. I mean, we could have an offline conversation. I don't want to bore everybody.
Yeah,
with the
no.
details.
You got the gist of what I was
Yeah,
looking for,
Yep.
which is in that movement to a cloud versus replicating
Right. We also
the hardware
contract
and a
with
lot of those
the
costs.
service, the company that does our third-party service. We contract with them for 24-hour recovery of our servers. So if we have a catastrophe of some sort, we can get the data, we can restore it to a server usually within 24 hours.
Perfect.
A business day.
And you're doing that now?
Yeah, we've done it for a number of years.
Perfect. Okay. Thank you on that area. And I have another. Keep going. Also, I'm noticing in here that on the technology side, 25,000. It's replacement of report card printers. It's a little bit more general, even just specifically the report cards. But what initiatives do you have, and are there some plans to try to cut back on printing and postage? And are you going to get to it? Maybe we have one. I don't have kids in the system, but maybe you have an e-report card and you can opt out of a paper, or at what point, and do you see soon to maybe try to realize some
Dr.
I'm
Tuttle, would you
assuming
like me to
significant
respond to that?
savings?
Sure, then I'll make a general statement, but you go first.
Oh, okay. We have a number of initiatives in play with printing. We've recently changed our copier fleet to allow better scanning and online faxing so that we can actually see a fax before we print it out, for example. We're also looking at consolidating printing. One of the problems that we have, especially in elementary schools, is that we don't have designated spaces for printers, and the fire marshal frowns on us sticking them in hallways and that sort of thing. So we do have to have some print available to support the curriculum. But we're also moving away from printed materials. So I think what you'll see over time is that we'll move away from that sort of thing. The student management systems that we're looking at will provide more access to transcripts, report cards, progress reports, information to both students and parents. That will also eliminate well, not maybe eliminate, but minimize the amount of paper that needs to be generated. So we're looking at lots of different ways of providing instruction in an electronic world.
And some of those new initiatives, are they specifically within here, or are they, as additional costs or kind of built-in costs, or are they just more, like a specific software or server or anything like that?
A lot of the initiatives are actually, I'll call them trades. For example, when we start talking about curriculum materials, instead of buying 50 textbooks, we may be buying a subscription service that's available online, any kind of computing device, whether it's your phone or a tablet or a desktop you have, could give you access to that or give the students access to it. There was an initiative last year to install a printer service level agreement. So we actually have a vendor now who is responsible for managing our printing fleet. And we're starting to see some savings there. So I would say it's more a trade-off than it is an investment in additional funding that's required.
Okay. Thank you. Yeah, I think that answers it for me on both of those fronts. So I did want to make a comment, just getting back to Representative Stanmore's earlier questions on the healthcare funding. One of the areas, not like some areas within the budget, one of the areas I do think you're doing a good job is that area. You guys are, comparative to the town who's been running a consistent deficit, you guys have had your house in order and continually, even in the face of building difficult budgets, have put that money there, and I certainly think you should be commended for doing that. I think it's obviously it's a big help for our bond rating in the town, and also just keeping your budget along with the town budget, in line. So thank you.
Thank you. Can I just comment and say that we've worked really hard at the board table to do that. We've had lengthy conversations, and we heard very clearly last year that the town wanted us to be an active participant in helping support that. And I think the board has stepped up to the plate and heard that call. We've worked really hard on that. So thank you for recognizing it.
Well, on the town side, I certainly appreciate that. So thank you.
Thank you. We'll continue with any questions. Representative McCarthy?
Dr. Tittle, just to dovetail on Representative McCullough's question a little while ago, when I went through the budget, the first thing I noticed was the change in the mix between paraprofessionals and teachers, and if I'd gone all the way to the back, I would have discovered the reason for that. It's laid out nicely on page 137. That 141,000 represents about 5% of the increase for which you're requesting this year, but my question is that likely to grow over time, or is that going to remain stable? That increase, there's an additional cost, if you will, associated with adopting this new model. How big a bump is that going to represent year to year?
It shouldn't represent any bump other than the normal, whatever the contractual increases are for the staff. So it isn't that, well, next year we have a plan to add 3 more paraprofessionals or 3 more teachers to this. This is the staffing level. So the only increases would be due to contract increases, or, depends on the needs of the students. If some particularly needy students move in who need additional paraprofessional support, we might have to support that. But there's no other shoe to drop here.
Okay. The other question I had, and this came up last year, as I look, perennial favorite, school psychologists at the elementary school level. From what I know about other school systems, typically they will share a psychologist between 2 or as many as 3 schools, but in Fairfield we made the decision to have 1 per school at every elementary school. So from the outside looking in, it tends to become, the question I have to ask, is this a need or a want? If you apply a principle of need versus want, it's something I struggle with.
Right. I'll let Andrea speak to it more specifically, but a couple of general comments. One would be that you need to look at the total package of services at the elementary level not just the psychologist. So if you look at the social worker support that we have, which in some ways overlaps with psychologist services, it's minimal. You might find in other systems might have, half a social worker and half a psychologist, and we've put more of our money in the psychologist basket. So that's one thing. Psychologists are more valuable as a general rule because they can conduct evaluations and social workers can't. So I think you have to look at the whole package. And the second thing is that the new school climate legislation on bullying puts huge responsibilities on people in the school to do large numbers of investigations and counseling of students who are involved in bullying one way or the other. It requires us to have a point person for all of this. And at the elementary level, that's going to fall to the psychologists. So they do a lot of work with the families. So those are my general comments. Let Andrea
Would that
speak
not
to it.
typically fall on the principal?
To some extent, it does, but the direct work with the families and with the children initially often is with the psychologists.
Okay.
We basically have a principal at each of the elementary schools. There's no other administrator there. So I think that's something we're all trying to work out right now, and this is something that's new. But if anything, this is going to increase the demands on our psychologists. Just the numbers and the requirements. So let me let Andrea speak to it in more detail, Tom. Not sure we'll convince you, but maybe there's a better
That's okay.
explanation.
I do get briefed in this nightly after I said, "How was your day, dear?" So
Right, I know. Andrea, grab a microphone.
Wow, I'm popular tonight.
Yes. Won the prize.
The metric I would use when comparing district to district at an elementary level is not just psychologist or social worker. I would also add the potential of a assistant principal and a school counselor. Typically, when I compare district to district at our levels, I look at counselor, guidance counselor, psychologist, and social worker as a school support services. Because individually, buildings make different decisions and school districts make different decisions. But I think at our elementary level, one of the things that impacts greatly, comparatively speaking, is the existence of an assistant principal. We don't have that. So our school psychologist full-time plays a role in the PPT process, both as an evaluator and a counselor and a family counselor, as well as running PPTs for the students who are being identified or who are being referred to special education to determine. So they do direct service and consultative services outside. But I would challenge us to look at the metric of the three, guidance, social worker, psychology, as a comparative FTE metric versus just psychologist. I think it's an unfair comparison. No, I'm saying you just don't see the broader picture. Psychologist is
I'm just pulling away.
it's a decision-making structure that other schools have just chosen to make different decisions. So I would just challenge you to look at those three positions as a whole FTE before we decide that we're overstaffed in a particular area.
Again, from the outside looking in, you say, well, on its face, what does it look like? And does it conform to the principle of need versus want? I think, if you look at the preamble of our book this year, taxes, taxes, taxes. So everything we look at, we got to think about its cost. So, I mean, it's a fair question. I appreciate your answer.
It's a fair question, absolutely. But I can show you that we are well within the average if you look at it in that other metric, so.
Okay.
Tom, are you good?
You good?
Any other members? Yes, Representative Richmond.
This is a question actually on kind of a change in enrollment. You notice we got the current enrollment, at middle schools, and we had done the renovations at Fairfield Woods to increase that population. And then looking at your projections, so is it the intent that starting in school year 12-13 is where we will see next year we'll see the increase in Fairfield Woods enrollment?
Yeah, you'll see some of it next year, and then you'll see some of it again the following year, because we're easing in a grade at a
Oh,
time.
okay, yep. That's what I was wondering, because I noticed, there was an increase slated for next year, and then we should see a decrease in Tomlinson?
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Any other members? You may have gotten off easy.
Okay.
I think that seems to be it. Is there anything else you want to mention or comment on, or?
No, I just want to say in closing, thank you very much. As you all know, this budget was passed unanimously by the Board of Education, and it is our lowest request for an increase going back to at least the 1950s, which is as far back as we could go. We think it's a fair and reasonable request, and we hope you support it in its entirety. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
I'll get you the stuff.
Okay, that's great, and then I'll email that out. And I just also want to mention to everyone that we will have a public comment period on April 30th at our full RTM meeting. Our subcommittee meetings, which are on, I think, the 23rd and 25th, will sort of be up to individual chairmen, but there's the possibility you can make comments there. I just think it would be more effective for most people to make comments at the April 30th meeting in front of the full body. It's a better use of time, and the impact would probably be greater if that's what you're looking for. Just another thing I want to just mention, it's more of an observation. I know this is the time when RTM members will get emails from different members of the public, different people involved in the budget process or monitoring the budget process, and we've seen different sort of tones in emails sent to us, and people can send whatever they want. I would just encourage mostly members of the public, and a lot of it is more heated in the education side, to I would suggest to use more positive direction in emails versus the other angle, because it will support your cause better. And I just recommend that these emails should be in a little more positive light, because I think they would tend to backfire the other way. And it's just a recommendation. It's a piece of advice from me to all you, and hopefully from all of us to all you, that it would just work in your favor better to have a more positive message. Thank you. We're going to take a 5-minute break, where we sort of left off on Wednesday night with the miscellaneous items, and I think you have the schedule right there.
I don't have.
I mean, we'll I don't know how you want to do this, because they're all somewhat related.
Did you want
but
to touch on the two
debt
areas
service
that,
contingency.
on the private school?
Oh, you want to touch on that? Okay, yeah.
Yeah.
He's going to touch on the items we kind of left off on the education, private school bus transportation, health and welfare services, briefly.
There are two functions that Dr. Title was up here that were not discussed. They're in the budget. One is the private school transportation, and the other is the health and welfare services. Basically, these are mandated services, mandated by state statute, to provide, first off, school transportation to the, I believe it's 11 or 12 private and religious schools within Fairfield. Only for Fairfield residents, not for residents attending these schools who are out of town. And there is a decrease in that budget for this year. For those, I'm sorry? Page 137 in the budget book. If anyone doesn't have their budget book here tonight, I've got some extra copies if someone wants it, because there's going to be several references back to the budget book. If anyone wants an extra copy. This is decreased by some 57,000.
Main budget book, by the way, not Board of Ed budget book.
The brown covered. There's a decrease of $57,000 on this line item for the proposed next year, and that's after, obviously, the 3% contractual increase in that. don't know if there's any questions on that particular item.
Are there any questions on that decrease? Okay.
The second item.
Yes, I'm sorry, we do have a question here. Representative Richmond?
On the private school bus transportation, I understand this is a state requirement that we provide transportation. And in looking at this, though, if it is causing a significant hardship to the town because of the scheduling or the number of buses, is there anything, any way the state gives us any kind of reprieve?
We do get a very small, it's in the revenue section. We do get a small state grant, under $6,000 for this. But there really is not, we have to provide services similar to the services that are provided for the public schools. An example of that, we have late buses that are provided for the high schools. We provide a late bus for Fairfield Prep, Notre Dame, and Fairfield Country Day School. And it is that type of services that we have. There are some options which we have in the past. We haven't used it right now, where there might be a school that has very, very small population of Fairfield students, where we have what is called a direct pay to the parents, in which there's a formula in which the parents are reimbursed for providing the transportation, but we would pay directly to the parents as opposed to providing transportation. That system we don't have in place. We have in the past years, particularly we had that with Hillel Academy up on Stratfield Road. That system is not in place right now, nor is it in the projected budget.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Okay, we'll move on to the health and welfare
The second budget, again, administered by the town, starts on page 139, which is the health and welfare services, primarily administered by the Board of Education through Ms. Leonardi's department, school psychologists, and other services that are provided, again, under, and in this case, under federal law, under the IDEA Act. Primarily, a lot of these services are being provided to St. Catherine's School up by Lake Mohegan, which is a parochial school for special needs students within the parochial school system. But it does provide psychological services and all to availability to all students within the private and religious schools within Fairfield.
Any questions? Okay. Thanks, Paul. We'll just move on now to the miscellaneous. I guess try and go in order here, if that order makes sense.
Okay.
Yeah, we could take Mary's stuff first if you want. You want to do human resources?
You want to take
Then we can go
Mary?
into. Yeah. Mary, if you just tell us which pages you're referring to when you do start talking.
I'm sorry, I have so many papers in here. It starts on page 71. I'd like to point out that the insurances which are 55210, 55220, 55230, 55240 are really all in the same general area in Munis, and many of those insurances are placed with KERMA, and we've had a relationship with KERMA where we have secured a hold on prices, but they fluctuate within the different accounts because each account or each one of these things has different experiences, so the insurances go up and down. But if you were to add the actuals for 09, 10, 11, 12, and budget for 12 and projected for 13, they are around the same number. Each year is about $1.1 million, so there's been no change in the last 5 years in those lines. They fluctuate wildly because of experience, and we've been very blessed to make this arrangement with KERMA, because if we did not have an arrangement like this, an ongoing arrangement with them, we would be facing some of the second insurers who have had very bad experience in the worldwide market, Japan, the Midwest with tornadoes, and their rates have gone up significantly. So that we're in a locked-in deal with KERMA has helped us tremendously. Education and membership appears to have gone down $5,000, but it's really a transfer of the $5,000 to fees and professional services because it's more appropriately categorized there. Oh, I'm sorry. Education and membership 58100 appears to have gone down by $5,000. It looks like a minus 45% decrease, but that $5,000 was moved to fees and professional services, which looks like a 10% increase, but it's a wash. It's just put in the more appropriate line item. Other than that, most of the budget is pretty flat, with the exception of workers' comp and heart and hypertension. Workers' compensation has been going up in the last 3 or 4 years fairly significantly. There were in the 08 budget, fiscal year 08, 09, there were some significant accidents on the Board of Ed's side that have had a profound impact in this budget. I have some printouts here, and I would say to you, the first 5 people from that date to now have spent over $800,000 has been spent on them. They've just had some back injuries, and we're doing what we can on the town side because we cover the Board of Ed on workers' comp. Workers' comp is both town side and Board of Ed sides. So we have increased our loss control, and you'll see there's a line in my budget that's gone from $10,000 to $20,000. That's so we can have a reasonable loss control program both on the Board of Ed and on the town side. We never had one of these programs. We started about 3 years ago after we saw some of these accidents that had taken place on the Board of Ed side. And one year we got the money to do things on the town side, and the following year the Board of Ed got the bulk of the money. We really want to put the money on both sides and see if that can have an impact in holding the line on these expenses. When somebody gets severely injured, it's a very long tail on workers' comp, so it takes a very long time for these claims to go through. And you could imagine if you fall and you hurt your back, it's not something that is over tomorrow. Most of the workers' comp claims are very small claims, and they are maybe a couple of $100s or a couple of $1,000. But if someone has an existing injury and then hurts himself again, it can become a very significant loss to the town, both in time lost and in cost of treatment. and we have, the state gives awards, and there is no option on how it plays out once it's an accepted complaint.
Peter, is that it? Yes, thank you.
And I'd also like to point out on the heart and hypertension. The heart and hypertension is a budget that wildly fluctuates. We've been going along at this $700 number, but in the last 10 years, we've had years that it's as low as $300,000 and as high as $900,000 in a given year. This is not. This is in July of last year, or this fiscal year. In 1 week, we spent over $200,000 of this budget line. There was a heart surgery and an award, and that my budget was not in good shape after that point in time. It's one of those budgets that you can budget for, but you cannot control. And so it's gone up this year because I know with those, there have been 2 major heart surgeries this year. I know awards will be coming down in the foreseeable future, probably next year, from the State Heart and Hypertension and Workers' Comp Commission. And so we've kind of factored some of that in. I don't know what the awards will be. I don't know what the percentage of heart that the individuals will get, but those have been factored in a little bit so that we don't have another budget year where we exceed it by this kind of money.
Question on that?
Sure. Representative McKenzie.
Excuse my naivete, but why wouldn't this be under regular medical? I mean, what happens on the job that creates this?
The heart and hypertension?
Yeah.
The state has decided a number of years ago that police officers or firefighters, should they develop any circulatory, heart, or hypertension issues, it is directly related to their work as a police officer and a firefighter. And therefore, it is not part of their medical package, but is treated differently. And it is paid for in full by this heart and hypertension.
And can you, who makes the judgment as to whether or not they're eligible for it?
The Workers' Comp Commission. But basically, if they were a police officer, say you have a police officer who's now 55 years old, and he started when he was 26, and when he started at 26, he did not have high blood pressure, hypertension. And over the course of his career, he developed hypertension. It is the belief of this law that he has developed this condition because of the nature of his position.
Can you tell me what % of the police force and the fire department have this?
I'm not going to tell you percentage. I'm going to tell you I have 50 active claims.
I'm sorry?
50 active claims at this point in time.
Out of how many people?
Well, there are approximately 200 between police and fire, but this goes on even after you retire. If you are a policeman or a firefighter and you retire and you have a hypertension claim, a heart and hypertension claim, you are covered until your death. And then if you leave us a widow, she receives a widow's benefit under the provisions of this law.
Thank you.
Representative Schwartz, I saw earlier. Let me go to Representative Matola first.
Yeah, I was going to follow up with that. Is that okay?
Yeah.
So, does the workers' compensation figure, does that figure include, we have outside legal counsel who handles those cases for the town?
We have a workers' comp attorney through our third-party coverage, PMA, and we use Rick Aiken as our lead attorney for these.
Okay.
And that's his specialty. That's all he does.
No, I know. Yeah. And so is that the figures that you have here? Does that include any legal fees, cost bills?
Well, if you see that these figures are very flat numbers, that's the number that's put in the budget, and then it's taken, I'll let Mr. Hiller speak to this, it's taken as a sweep. So some of these years, the numbers have actually been higher, but that's the number that we had in the budget, and that's the number that gets taken out of my budget.
We utilize a third-party firm, PMA of New England, to administer our workers' comp claims and heart and hypertension claims also. They retain outside counsel to represent us on these claims, and it's as you're aware, it's very specialized work, appearing before the Workers' Compensation Commissioner, and those fees, which I think in the spreadsheet were probably someplace on legal services in the $60,000 to $75,000 range annually, are within this budget. They are not within legal services. PMA takes draws out of our account, $100,000 at a time, and that would include payments, indemnity payments, medical payments, and legal payments that would be administered for this.
And then just one, on the heart and hypertension, my understanding is that, is it the case that when a firefighter or a police officer makes one of those claims, aren't they also at the same time seeking a heart and hypertension disability retirement? And that's a general question. Let me
Well, they have to be disabled enough not to do the duties of a police officer or a firefighter. There have been some police officers or firefighters who have retired with a disability, but like most of us today, you take your medication and you can continue working in your regular job. But there certainly are individuals who this illness gets to a point that it is disabling.
So that figure that you have here, that doesn't include any monies that go towards any type of heart and hypertension disability retirement?
No.
Okay.
But I will say to you that there has not been one. I've been in this job for the last 6 years, and we have not had a single person who retired under that reason. So it does not happen all that often.
I would add this, the number in there, though, does include payments to, and I believe the number is 6 widows of deceased police or firefighters. And basically, we own those people. We own those surviving spouses for the duration of their life. And those payments, those weekly payments are in this budget.
Thank you. So this is a question in ignorance, not challenging anybody. But I think what I heard you both say was that we have someone working as a third party administering this and also doing the legal or hiring out the legal work. And I'm wondering, in the same way that we might want a contractor and a construction manager on a job site watching each other, is it different here that we don't need 2 separate entities, that having one entity representing us on both the legal and the financial front is okay?
The legal is handled by an outside firm.
But
It's not handled by PMA.
But the firm is hired by PMA.
Yes, but I had our broker look at PMA and the use of legal fees, and they thought it was appropriate. So we had an internal audit on it, and they thought that it was appropriate use.
Appropriate to go through this procedure of having the same
Yes.
entity kind of representing both aspects.
Yes.
Because it does seem, in the same way, like I say, with the schools, where it's nice to have somebody we hire watching.
Well,
you know?
this our broker who looked at PMA and how PMA paid claims and how we utilized attorney fees with PMA, and they thought that there was an outside entity who looked at PMA and the legal that is done for PMA and us, and they found it appropriate. they thought it was okay.
Okay.
Obviously, workers' comp has been going up dramatically over the last couple of years. I was wondering if you could tell us what programs you have to identify regularly recurring injuries and I measure exactly where they're coming from and programs to implement to try to reduce claims.
We're presently undergoing an assessment by PMA, and that means that they're looking at the safety procedures that we follow both on the Board of Ed and on the town side currently. And then they'll make some recommendations to us. We've increased the amount of money for the loss control program, and I have to say that we identified those things that had gone for us wrong, which helped to really increase this line so much in the '08 budget year. There were a number of custodians and teachers who were injured on the Board of Ed side. Even though the Board of Ed has a lot more people than the town side, you would not think that it would be as evenly divided in costs because we have a great deal more dangerous positions on the town side. We would have expected fire, police, and DPW to be generating a lot more, and they are not doing as much damage to this budget as I said, the top 5 or 6 lines or individuals on the Board of Ed were responsible for $800,000 over the last few years. So what that told us is there were some back injuries, and we've done training on the Board of Ed with the custodians, and we're doing it over and over again because you forget. So every couple of years we repeat the same training. And so you get new people in, old people go back to bad habits, and you keep training. And so that's what we're doing, and we're addressing those things. But it's a few bad experiences that can drive this budget, and unfortunately that's what we had. And medical trend goes up in this, and awards go up in this based on increases in salaries.
Okay. I'm just looking at all the total line items for those 3 of them. In the budget summary, it says that we dropped $1 million in for the risk management, $173,000 in heart and hypertension, and $550,000 in workman's compensation. So by my calculation, that comes out to be $1.7 million additional revenue that we added in. And then it says that this increase is offset by a reduction of $583,000, $789 for the ISF from last year. My question is if we put $500,000, almost $600,000 into internal service fund, why are we still adding $1.1 million to this department, which is like 85, almost 90% of the total budget increase for this department?
First off, the increase in the heart and hypertension does not go into the internal service fund. That is segregated out, and that is solely a general funding expense, and it does not. About 3 or 4 years ago, the administration, with the consent of the Board of Finance, took the heart and hypertension budget out of the internal service fund and took that liability out of the internal service fund, and so there's only the workers' comp on those lines is within it. Additionally, in this budget, you'll see the contribution. I get to the right page. The contribution for risk management fund claims, $575,000, that is within the internal service fund.
Right, but the summary says that we put $500,000 into the internal service fund last year in order to offset part of the $1 million contribution that we're making this year. But if let me get it right. If the heart and hypertension is not part of the internal service fund, how do we deposit $583,000 in last year to offset an expense from this year.
I think if you look at it, it says supplemental contribution to health insurance. It had nothing to do with either workers' comp or heart and hypertension. It was to put the money into, it was money that the Board of, correct me if I'm wrong, the Board of Finance put in the budget at the end of the process, and instead of going back to each individual department, they put it in a lump sum in my budget that the money would go towards that budget line, and it was not divided out amongst various departments.
You'll see that number on the budget book on page 73, line 52101, which was the supplemental contribution for health insurance, ISF. ISF obviously standing for Internal Service Fund. And as Mrs. Merrily has just said, that was the intent of the Board of Finance, ratified by the RTM a year ago, to supplement. Actually, there were newer figures that were coming in from Aon at that time, and rather than dividing it between all the departments, it all dumped into this one line.
Paul, maybe it would be helpful if you explain what's in the Internal Services Fund.
Well, I'm just trying to figure out, so we are basically dumping almost a little over $1 million into the 3 additional lines just to cover what we have had in unforeseen expenses over the last 2 years since, in those 3?
Now, the unforeseen expenses within the Internal Service Fund for the last 21 months, in other words, last fiscal year and this fiscal year, have been primarily in the workers' comp area. That's where we've really taken a serious hit.
So the risk management, the $1 million in the risk management is really to help offset the workman's comp?
That is the intent of the budget that's before you, to supplement those funds and to strengthen what has been the concern of the rating agencies.
On the ISF.
Is the overall deficit in the Internal Service Fund, which is being caused primarily by a $7.5 million accrual reserve for workers' comp.
Okay, so this is just moving the numbers so we have a better place to remove them. So our ISF isn't going to look so bad because now we have a different line item. But we're still adding $1.1 million to the entire human resources budget as a contingency based on history and what we're afraid might be coming down the pike. So we're covering our expenses? Because I'm still $1.1 million higher than we were last year, right?
Well, if you look at it now, though, the Board of Finance has added another $1 million to that as far as the supplemental contribution beyond what's in this book.
The Board of Selectmen added $1 million, and then the Board of Finance added $1 million on top of that.
Correct.
So now we're $2.1 million. Thank you.
Thank you. So on the errors and omissions side, that's carried within this budget. There was, I just want to kind of go back, I think where we headed a little bit earlier. One of the concerns was that during the Metro Center, that had we wanted to have, for instance, gone back against the former town attorney, that the errors and omissions policy that he held was only, I believe it was $1 million, and the legal costs alone would have gone right through that. Have we, done something to, for any attorney, not just a town attorney, but any attorney that's coming to us to take out a policy on their own, and have we done anything within our own end otherwise to make sure that we're protected? Because obviously it's one thing when we're the ones suing, but when somebody else turns around and maybe decides that they don't like something that they've done or they're concerned and they decide to sue potentially the town and, let's say, that attorney for their act or something along those lines. It seemed like we found ourselves in a very vulnerable position based on that timing. So I'm wondering if you could shed some light on any steps that have been taken since then to protect the town from any sort of liability in that area.
I did a little, it's public officials' liability, and it's a highly complex issue, and every situation is different. Please take this generic explanation at face value with the understanding that the specifics of an individual case determine how coverage applies. Sometimes a single word in a 50-page writ can change everything. The policy will cover an attorney who is on the town payroll while acting within his scope of duties for the town, but it does not cover a contracted attorney. An attorney who is not your employee or our employee needs separate professional liability. For an attorney, and it goes on to explain it. It is on the website with budget information, this whole document. Our town attorney, one of the questions asked, our present town attorney has $2 million of liability. I don't know what we would think is the appropriate amount.
And all of the, you would consider them to be either special counsel or assistant town attorneys?
If they work for the town, then they would be covered for the town. If they're a contract employee, or they we hire them and we pay an hourly rate, they are required to have their own insurance. The insurance that I purchase for the town would not cover them. The insurance I have would cover a public official who made a mistake. And then there is a $10 million umbrella policy. The first $100,000 we would pay, and then Kerma would pay the next $1 million. So I have lots of lines of coverage for mistakes that we make as an official of the town. I don't cover any contract employee.
We don't have any attorneys that are on payroll at this time, do we?
No.
So so is there some sort of a standard that is in place now that sets forth the minimum requirement for any of these firms? Because we do, well over a dozen firms that we do business with. And
I would not be the person to make that determination.
Mr. Hiller or Mr. Tetro? Somebody
I'm not
answer
familiar with it.
what we're doing with that? Maybe through the chair to the first selectman who is here. Either A, do you have an answer to that, or can you get back to us with an answer as to if something's going to be put in place or already is that we don't know about?
What's that?
We'll be happy to get back.
Okay.
This information I got from Ellen Thies, who is our broker with People's United Insurance, said $2 to $3 million insurance, and Mr. Stanton has $2 million worth of insurance. So I don't know what other insurances you're looking at. I just saw that. It's been a while since I put this together.
Yeah, so if the range that they're suggesting is $2 to $3 million, I guess the question would be, do all of them have $2 to $3 million? Is there some sort of a backstop or a plan in place
I
to
think
do that? And it's not so much you, it's obviously the first selectman that's going to get back to us.
She was indicating the town attorney. I don't know who else would be covered by that.
Okay.
Any other questions on human resources? Yes, you can.
I want to go back to the Internal Service Fund just for a second. Since I got interested in this last year, and I remember, at least I think I remember, a fair amount of what went on. And as I recall, the Board of Finance was taking little bits and pieces from all over the place and putting it in the Internal Service Fund last year, which is where that $583,000 came from. That didn't happen this year, but we put in two separate $1 million chunks into the Internal Service Fund. But we're not really putting in $2 million more this year. We're actually putting in 1.4 something more this year, since we put in 580 last year. Am I also correct in remembering that the reason that we got the warning from Moody's was due to the Internal Service Fund's deficit?
Yes, that is correct.
Okay, so this is probably not a terribly bad thing.
I think what both the First Selectman, Board of Selectmen, and the Board of Finance are attempting to do here, clearly, is to address the concerns that Moody's has raised. Clearly, this is not going to get, there was a slight improvement in fiscal 11 over fiscal 10 in this account. We anticipate there will be some improvement again this year in fiscal 12, again, slight improvement. And I think what the previous boards and administration have attempted to do is to really address this issue head-on. As I indicated, our liability there, where the big hole is on the workers' comp side. That's where there is a $7.5 million liability, which has grown dramatically, frankly, over the last 4 or 5 years as to what it was, and it is really all on the workers' comp side. The two health insurance funds that are in there, which are the town and the Board of Education, are positive. Dr. Title addressed their situation earlier, and the town was negative a couple of years back, but has turned the corner on this one and has gotten to a positive thing, even after the IBNR.
So this really is kind of a necessary thing.
We believe so,
when you
and I
look
think
at the big
when we
picture.
go down early this summer to Moody's, hopefully we're going to be able to convince them of this, and that the boards and hopefully this body, the legislative body, will have taken the corrective action. As I say, it's not going to be solved in 1 year. That would be an extreme burden on the taxpayers, but it's a situation that has grown dramatically over the last 4 or 5 years, particularly in this one area, and the intent is to address it and to hopefully quell their fears.
Hi. You're heavily involved in working with our healthcare providers. We're obviously self-insured, but you work with Blue Cross or Anthem. And I know that last year we had a 10% increase in our healthcare. This year we had some favorable experience and higher contributions from employees, which helped actually come up with a net decrease across the town. That's not my question, but I think the Board of Ed might have had been up maybe 600,000, but the town was down, so it certainly wasn't 10%.
It was a very good,
Right.
a very, very positive year.
Right. So I think just one comment. I think we have to continue to work on increasing the percentages of contribution in all our labor agreements.
Mm-hmm.
Again, 28% is the average for federal employees and what they contribute, and in many of our departments we're well under that. So I think we need to do a lot of work there. There's obviously savings. We're all seeing them this year. I also think the non-union employees in town need to get to a percentage. I think $25 a week. I don't know how many employees there are, but that has to get recalibrated at some point. So my question though is there anything that we're doing, or are we looking at potential new models of administering the healthcare benefit that we have? Are we looking at new vendors at all? I would imagine that at this time, there would be a few vendors, actively trying to sell you and probably talking about, better rates. That's question one. Or in question two is, have we looked at or done any analysis on going from self-insured to more of a managed care model?
We haven't done anything on self-insured to managed care. We have to negotiate with our unions. You heard Dr. Tittle talk about negotiating with the custodians about how they're going to do work and how we're going to pay them. It is a term and condition of employment, and it is mentioned specifically that we are insured by Anthem. We went out to bid on insurance with the Board of Ed a couple of years ago, and it gave us leverage to get better pricing where we are, and we did that. But we will move with the Board of Ed whenever it is an appropriate time to move, because our number together gives us a good volume discount.
But Anthem's actually in the contract, so we really don't have any flexibility.
We we have some flexibility, but we would have to come up with a similar plan.
We can't look at RFPs from other.
We can look at RFPs,
But we'd have to get them into the agreements.
No, we can't change to a managed care plan without negotiating.
Okay.
We have a plan as specified, the Anthem plan. Now, I can go out and mirror that Anthem plan and go out for bid, and we did do that about 2 years ago, and we found out that the plan the way we're administered, because of the volume discount with the Board of Ed and the town, moving as a group, bidding it out as a group, we were in good shape. And we will do so again in another year or so.
Okay.
Every so many years, we bid out all the components. We bid out the insurances, the property insurance. We go and look at that, and then another year we'll look at the health insurance. So we can't do it all in one year, but we periodically look at each set of these insurances that are in this budget.
Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Rose?
Hi. I'm a little confused with these three items myself. Paul, I heard you say there's a $7.5 million accrual on this.
On the workers' comp piece, yes.
So we know there's a liability in front of us for how many years?
Those are the liabilities that are actuarially computed by by PMA. They give us that number.
Is there any way to, at this point, for workers' comp, and let me just move to the heart and hypertension. You said that the majority of that had to do with 2 heart operations, and they were from spouses of...
No.
I'm sorry.
About $300,000 this year involved 3 people.
3 people?
3 people.
Mm-hmm.
2 surgeries and a settlement, an award from the state. The state decides how much damage has happened to a person's heart and what financial compensation there is associated with that. If somebody who has heart surgery and has a significant portion of their heart damaged, it is a significant award, and the state determines that, and we just get notified how much money they've spent. So this year we had a very bad year with those 2 surgeries. Those 2 surgeries, you never know when something like that's going to happen. What Paul referred to is heart and hypertension provides for benefits to the individual who gets these ailments, and it provides that if an individual dies from an ailment that is heart and hypertension, then his widow will receive benefits under the heart and hypertension for the rest of her life. So she receives cash every year.
Okay, but it would not apply to the family of, let's say, a fireman or a policeman if they had a heart problem?
No.
Okay.
No, please.
Well, I just trying to figure out
Thank you.
how wide is the parameter here.
No, it's pretty wide, but it doesn't go that far.
And I guess lastly, in both of these issues, it seems how are we totally self-insured? There's no reinsurance programs
We
involved?
have excess insurance on workers' comp. So after it hits $500,000 for an individual occurrence, you fall down the steps and hurt your back. When it gets to $500,000, then our excess carrier will pick up the difference.
Per individual?
Per individual, per occurrence.
Okay. Thank you.
That does not apply to heart and hypertension, though. That is just on the workers' comp.
It's only workman's comp. There's no reinsurance in the heart and hypertension? Is there any reason why we don't look at that, or is...
I don't think it's available.
Nobody provides it?
I don't believe it's available.
Does the state reimburse us something, of some portion, seeing how they mandate
No,
how
this
much
is an
they're gonna give?
unfunded mandate.
Oh, great. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you. Getting back to the reinsurance component, on general liability lawsuits, are we reinsured on those, or does that come directly and entirely out of the town's coffers?
We are insured with deductibles on those for tort actions that are taken against the town. We are self-insured up to, there's a self-insured retention of $500,000 on that. That also applies also on property damages, where there's a $250,000 self-insured retention.
So on property, there's a quarter. On general liability, there's $500,000, and then
$500,000 on general liability.
they pay everything after that?
They
Or at some cap
yeah, and
that it comes back
will
to
also
us?
usually include legal costs getting up to that level.
Okay. Are there conditions on those policies where the town could be found negligent, and that we would have to pay entirely? I mean, is that covered there, or is it because it's general liability, it's assumed in some sense we might be deemed at fault?
At my opening line from that statement about public officials' liability is the devil's in the details. It would have to be the specific wording. And it would have to be looked at. Kerma would have to look at it and make a determination. I really can't. Anything is possible, but I can't make a determination because I would take a specific claim. When I get notice of a claim, I send it on to Kerma. And I have to, and under the terms of our contract, I have to do so within so many days of having been received notice.
Okay. I guess I ask because I have some concerns about, obviously there's been a number of things ranging from personnel to obviously the contractual issues that seem to be some potential looming very sizable lawsuits, and my concern would be that if the town were to be negligent, would it wipe out some of these funds that we have? And how?
Well, public officials' liability is assuming that we made a mistake, is that a public official made a mistake or that we're being sued. And I believe it would be covered, but again, the caveat is every single situation is unique and special, and the devil is in the details, and I cannot make that determination without, as it said, one word in a 50-page writ could change whether or not there would be an issue.
Okay. Yeah, I'll leave it at that for now. Thank you.
All right, I think we're going to move along. We've got not much time left to cover these other areas, so thank you, Mary.
Thank you.
Paul, I mean, we have debt service, contingency fund balance, pension. I mean, how quickly can you go through those?
All right. I passed out a short time ago the waterfall chart, which the Board of Finance has created has evolved over perhaps the last 2 years, and this is it is what it is. There are certain estimates within here as far as the budget for the coming year is concerned. the figures are probably the one area of this budget which if you cut, we've got real problems because we would be in default. And so it's probably the one area of the budget which is sacred from the standpoint that there's not much wiggle room here.
Questions on debt service? I'm going to go over to Ellen. Here, just pass that down.
Ken's hot.
Thank you. Yeah, I just want to ask something about bond anticipation notes. I would love somebody to explain how they work and whether they add to our indebtedness or how do they help?
What we've been doing for several years, we've been issuing debt, long-term debt, 20-year debt, basically on a cycle now of every 2 years. There are some fairly significant costs attributable to issuing new debt. And what we've done over this cycle is in virtually every year, we issue what are called bond anticipation notes. The projects which this body passed 2 or 3 weeks ago tonight, I forget, the so-called non-recurring capital, which are on a 5-year basis, would more than likely be intended to be placed into bond anticipation notes. And that is debt that we issue on an annual basis with a 12-month maturity. And we are required under the law to pay that down under the prescribed period of time. We do have the ability under the law to continually roll it over up to an 8-year period, but within 8 years it has to be paid off. One of the advantages has been, particularly over the last 3 or 4 years, is the rates on this type of borrowing have been extraordinarily low. We currently have a bond anticipation note outstanding just in excess of $41 million, and we paid our interest cost on that is 19 basis points, less than a quarter of a point that we're paying for the interest on borrowing $41 million.
Does it replace the bond, or is it a short-term?
Doesn't replace the bond. I think it's really, and I think the acronym for it, the BAN, so-called, which is the bond anticipation note. Much of the money that's out right now, for example, of the 41 million that's out, I would say that probably, I don't have that schedule with me, but perhaps at least 30 million of those funds will be put into long-term bonds this summer. We will take that money, for example, the 4 biggest projects in the bond issue this summer would be Penfield, the remainder of Stratfield School, and the largest, or about 15 million, for Fairfield Woods School. Also, the paving projects and money for Sherman School. Those are the elements of it. We would additionally, also, the other piece of it would be the additional funds that were approved late last summer for the additional funds for the railroad station. Other funds where we're not quite as certain on as to what we're going to have to borrow, we would put into short-term money with the anticipation that we would pay that off either or start the schedule of paying it down in the following year, or convert them to actual long-term bonds in 2014.
So do they represent what we are borrowing to do these projects?
Yes,
Okay,
and
so
it
we're
does
not
show up.
borrowing on top of borrowing.
Well, you're not borrowing on top of borrowing because it's the initial borrowing. You can't double borrow. We have authorizations. We intend to borrow roughly on the railroad station $4.5 million additional dollars, which will have been spent to complete that project. We may not know the exact final number on it, so we might hold back a portion of that until we know the final money so that we don't over borrow. So if we only need to borrow $4.25 million, we're not going to go out and borrow $4.5 million. We would probably, we would borrow on the underside of this so that we don't over borrow.
For now, thank you.
This is just an extension of the waterfall. One of the things in looking at this over the years is what comes to my mind is what it actually represents. I know that we, as we do projects, we will bond in that summer for whatever that work is and continue on. But is it possible to get a look at, for instance, what makes up, the bonds that for 630, in terms of our approved bonding measures, what project that belongs to, just so we get an idea of how, like if we're bonding, let's say Fairfield Woods, if it's over 3 years, or just to be able to put those in a little better perspective.
Yeah, we can isolate on Fairfield Woods as an example. We have a note outstanding on Fairfield Woods of $15 million that we owe on that. We had previously, in a bond issue of 2010, we had previously issued some bonds for the startup of that project. We will take virtually all of that $15 million, I would think at this time, and this is a decision to be made within the next 60 days, but it's pretty certain we're going to have to borrow all of that money and convert it into 20-year bonds. We would then, we'd be able to come back to you and say, okay, well, you had an authorization. I think the original authorization was $24,700,000 or something like that. We have started to receive some payments back from the state. We anticipate we will receive additional payments back from the state. And so what do we have to, what are we going to have to borrow on that? It is unlikely that we can close that project out. One project, for example, that we would likely close out this time would be Stratfield. We know pretty much, Stratfield's done.
Right. What I'm thinking is we have a number of new RTM members, and in terms of helping them understand where we are in this process and what's going forward, it would be nice just to get a list of these are our active bonding elements, so to speak, the projects, and how they fit into the waterfall in terms of what we have approved and what makes up these bonds. Just to, instead of just seeing numbers, to put like kind of a name with that number. I think that would be very helpful to understanding where we are and how much we're spending and what's being projected.
It is, and I think the Board of Finance, along with the Board of Selectmen and representatives from the RTM, will hold now it'll be the third annual Capital Planning Summit, so-called, in mid-September. What that does is that gives us an opportunity to look at where we are and where we're going. As you can see on here, there's some presumptions as to what we're doing. Obviously, right now, and the Board of Ed has put forward a capital planning document with several larger projects. We have just, this body has just approved the bonding for the Ward roof. There's just been a building committee approved for Riverfield School. A portion of the ward roof would be in this bond issue. The major portion of it will be deferred to later years because we don't anticipate that project will go over a 3 to 4 year period. But all of these projects, both on the town side and on the Board of Ed side, will come up at that capital planning summit. All of these projects are eventually going to have to come before this body for final funding.
Carolyn, we're also going to have in May at the committee level, we're going to have a kind of a presentation, and Mr. Tetro has been part of this, Mr. Flynn, on bonding, on the waterfall. We're going to go into much more detail. We're going to go over the whole thing. We're running short on time. I want to get through this. I want to ask questions. That is a good question. It's a deep question. It's a bigger question. We're going to talk about it at the committee meetings in May. Are there any other questions? Sheila, I know you had a question. You sure? Joe? David?
If during this next fiscal year, basically one of the things you have is you have a couple things. This last fiscal year, this current fiscal year, you have some bond interest cost savings through some refinancing.
Yes.
I guess, and maybe you don't necessarily need to say this right now because obviously it's a lot of numbers, but my question would be how much of our debt is over, from an interest rate perspective, over where we could obtain right now? And if we were to do larger refinancing, is there any sort of broad refinancing that could be done? How much of it's, over, because my concern here is that we do still have some tranches of debt that we could save money on. I understand there's a spread that you make in that determination, but my concern would be that if that's the case, there may be some significant savings that we could find that could aid in, obviously we have a revenue problem, we have a spending problem with a number of issues within this next budget, and that might aid that. So
I think what you're referring to, of course, is I hope this body is well aware, we were able to effect a refunding which closed in early January this year, which had significant savings both in the current year and in next year, and over the life of the bonds had savings in excess of $3.6 million in interest costs. There is, on the short-term horizon, when I say the short-term horizon, which would take us through the conclusion of next year, we don't have those opportunities. And rest assured, when we knew that one was coming, the underwriters are literally bombarding me because they know our schedules as well or better than we do, and they have very highly sophisticated programs that will show us, what the savings are. And probably for 6 months, around this time last year, I started to get emails from 3 different underwriters. We went through a competitive situation to evaluate those underwriters. And we'd done business with all 3 of them previously, so we were familiar with them. And our current debt structure, with call provisions on bonds, et cetera, does not pretend anything in the immediate future. And we've looked at this, our financial advisor has looked at it, so I can say with pretty good certainty that, we don't see any change in this for the next 18 months, perhaps.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, we're going to, yes, Ken. No?
I'm sorry, I know we want to go home. I asked Paul this question last week, and I just wanted to see if we could get a quick answer. Looks like debt service this year is almost $26 million. That's based on a AAA rating. If that rating goes to the next lowest level, how much more is it? And if we did go to the next lower rating, how hard is it to get back to our current rating? And that may not be a question that we have time to answer tonight, but I'm going to keep asking it, because it seems to me that, $26 million is the biggest single number I see anywhere.
This question wasn't a setup, because I'm passing out or is making the circles around. But I think it was Ken who had asked it last Tuesday or Wednesday evening. And I promised that I would get back to you. What is being passed out here is a sheet that I copied from today's issue, April 9th issue of the Bond Buyer, which is essentially the Bible for municipal bond issuance throughout the country. In the upper right corner is what you'll see are municipal market yields. And these are kind of a benchmark as to, if we went to market last Thursday, because as you see, it says values as of April 5th. But if we went to market last Thursday, what we would get. The 2013 would basically be the short-term paper or the bond anticipation notes. And we would anticipate that we'd pay 27 basis points, and you can look at it right across. If we were AA, we'd pay more than 50% more for that money. We'd pay 44 basis points. In single A, you really start getting up there. You go right down the list. 2017 is 5-year paper. Variance is about 25 basis points. We would be issuing debt now, which would be due in 2032, and that spread is roughly 34 basis points between AAA, AA. The second part of your question is a question I don't think either Mr. Tetro or myself want to face. And that is, if you were to get a downgrade, what does it take to get back up? It takes a lot. And I think it takes time, too. There's, and no slur at Mr. Newman, but the city of Stamford was downgraded by Moody's a year or so back from AAA to AA1, and it's a struggle because everyone's trying to get there. There have been other, frankly, less stable communities in this state. Town of Hamden received a double downgrade within the past year by both rating agencies. And it's, we're doing, or I think the proposals that are before you collectively from the administration, the Board of Selectmen, and the Board of Finance, in my opinion, are very, very sound fiscal policies. And it's something that I think that when we speak to the rating agencies early this summer, we can proudly talk about this issue. We're not perfect. I passed out the other night some comparisons with the other 17 AAA towns, and we're towards the bottom decile, shall we say, as far as fund balance is concerned, and we know that. We have other strengths that some of the other towns don't have. One of them, which we're going to get into a little bit, is the pension fund and some of our other policies that we've looked at. But to get, once you've been downgraded, it's not something you turn around in 1 or 2 years. It can take some time. Contingency. This is, and if you want to find it in the, it starts on page 87 in the budget book. This is primarily, there's two components to this. Primarily, this is where the major dollars exist for pending labor settlements. As you're aware, the fire settlement has been transferred out of this account. And so the number that you're looking at there of $1.6 million has been amended by the Board of Finance. Mrs. Gardner probably has that number. I don't have it right with me, but it is to reflect the settlement that has been acted on by the by this board, by this body. There are some limited funds in here for some other things that we would anticipate. An example of that, there would appear a fairly strong likelihood that we may have primaries in both political parties this summer. And those funds, I'd say we're pretty certain we're going to have it in one party, and probably likely we're having it in both. Those funds would be in this account. And it's also for other unanticipated emergencies that might come up.
It was my understanding that they reduced this $561,483 due to the settlement of the firefighters contract?
That is correct.
So instead of being 1.6, it's basically less than 1.1?
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
But you still have, remember this, you still have 5 other unions out there, the biggest one being the police union, which has not been settled. Okay. As you may well be aware, the pension boards commissioned this past winter an experience study of our 2 pension plans. For those who are new here, the town administers and supports 2 defined benefit pension plans: the police and fire pension plan and the town employees pension plan. The intent was, and it was a mutual intent both by the Board of Finance and the pension boards, which are combined into a joint investment board, to update a study which was done 5 years ago as to literally what the report says, to study the experience of our pension plan over this period of time. That report was presented to the pension board in early February. They adopted it with some modifications. There were changes which were alluded to, Dr. Title alluded to them earlier this evening, based on these changes. There is a report, I have a copy of it available, not available here, but which we can get to you, which is a summary of the report, which was made when our actuary, Hooker and Holcomb, came to the Board of Finance back in their last session on March 20th. From what the original recommendations were, to meet the ARC, the annual recommended contribution by the actuaries, there was a reduction in both, overall, of both plans of $820,000. And that, which you will find, and I would refer to you primarily in the budget book to pages 290 and really the best place to find it is on page 292 in the budget book, which is the pension summary. The original numbers which we had received last fall from the actuaries were to put $5,451,000 into both plans. That was amended as a result of the experience study with a reduction of some $820,000 with a recommended contribution of $4,631,000. As you can see, the town plan is split between 4 budgets. The town, which is the biggest component of it, the Water Pollution Control Authority, the Board of Ed, which was spoken of earlier, and the smallest portion being the school lunch program. What the Board of Finance did is they felt, because one of the concerns is that though there is a excuse me, a decrease in this year's pension, we anticipate a fairly significant rise in next year's contribution. And so the Board of Finance added, from what the Board of Selectmen did, added $820,000 as a contribution solely to the town employees plan. They didn't touch the police and fire contribution because that was already being increased by roughly $150,000. So that the pension contribution that is within the Board of Finance recommended budget is essentially the same as last year by adding $820,000 overall. Not all of that is seen here because, for example, Dr. Title gave the figure earlier this evening. I don't have sheet. I think their portion is $344,000 or something like that. The town has their portion. A portion of it's in the WPCA, and thank you, Hal. And a portion of it is in the school lunch program. Increase of just under $20,000 in the WPCA piece. $334,000 in the Board of Ed, and right down the line to total is $820,000. I'm sure you got questions, so.
Let's go to questions.
The only thing I have, it's not even a question so much as a comment. In the pension summary, it does have essentially a notation with the 401A that there's a $6,000 cost.
Correct.
I would just recommend, and I'm sure maybe in next year's budget book, literally break that out as its own object code versus an asterisk and supporting documents. I just think people would track that.
And that number's going to grow. That number is a result of employees that were hired after April 1st of last year, when the THEA contract, the Town Hall Employees Association contract, was ratified by this body, and any that closes entry to the defined benefit plan for those employees hired after April 1st of 2011.
Yeah, and as you said, that number is going to grow, which would be why it might be nice, especially as boards have adjustments within the pension, and we've done this in other areas. It's a recommendation, that it just might be helpful for all of us in our practice. That's all.
Question, yes, John.
Can I have a microphone, please? Thanks. So, Paul, if I'm understanding you correctly, the ARC figure that you mentioned was...
It was $820,000 too much? Is that?
No, what happened was as a result of the experience study.
Right, we did better than we thought we were going to do.
We did better than we thought we were going to do.
Right.
And so what was originally, and I'm going back, holiday time.
Right.
We thought we were going to have to put in $5,451,000.
And that's on page 292.
That's on page 292.
Right.
Well, really, that's what we have in this year's budget, and we thought we were going to have to. When the ARC came out, it dropped that number down to the 4,631,000 number. What the Board of Finances now said, whoa, wait a second, this thing is not going to go away.
So let's just keep it there.
Let's keep it at what we're putting in the current year.
Gotcha.
And so this is, we're, if you were to approve this, for example, and when the actuary report comes out a year from now, for July 1st of 2013, and if you were to put that money, that extra $820,000 in, there's a part in there where the actuaries and the auditors will say, what percentage of the ARC did we contribute? That percentage is going to be 120% or something in that magnitude. Don't hold me exactly to that 20% add, but we're going to go on that one. What it would say is that we contributed 100% of the ARC for police and fire, but 120% for
Town side.
For the town employees. But if there were a change on it, you got to change 3 budgets over which this body has some say. You don't vote on the school lunch program.
Right. All right, that's fine. Thank you.
I just have a comment. This really goes with this. So basically, by adding the $820,000 to the $4,631,327, we get a new total of $5,451,327 for pension summary.
That is correct.
Thank you.
Ann mentioned that we didn't cover the fund balance in its entirety. Is there anything else we want to mention on that? Ann,
We talked about that the first or second night, I guess, and I guess, and the plea that I make to you here is
I want to make clear, because I'm not asking you to go through the whole process by which you projected a different fund balance or a different surplus. I understand there be many components, and I can imagine only some of them. My question had more to do with the timing of your awareness of the information, because there was a very intense series of events. The town learned, I think roughly on March 20th, that the experience in the various health funds was such that the supplemental contribution in the budget would not be sufficient to bring the surplus to a level that would look good to the rating agencies. So an additional amount was put in by the Board of Selectmen and cuts made in other areas to counter that, Board of Education being one of them. That happened on the 26th. I mean, the dates are seared in my mind right now. Several nights later, 2 nights later, we learned that you had identified some areas where there would be a projected savings in the budget, some areas of expense that would be lower than you anticipated, some other areas of income. I think the town clerk would have some income that would be higher. The Board of Education had managed the private bus transportation well, and there were some savings there. How did that information come to you in that short amount of time? I mean, did you already know these things and only bring them forward then? Was it information?
I think there's 2 parts to that. First off, this is the 14th year that I've sat on this side of the table doing this, and so the same question was asked to me last year, and it's a very, very risky question to answer. I said last year, and ironically the number I gave last year was $1.5 million. It would be $1.5 million, and I did that, I think, a little bit earlier. The final number was $1,478,000 on a budgetary basis, and that's in this book. I wish I had had as much luck on my March Madness pool as far as attempting to prognosticate that, because that's pretty close. I mean, $22,000 in a $260 million budget is bringing it in pretty much on the money. I think two of the things is, where as each day goes along, you become more confident as to where you're going to be. I think that's it. And we had been tracking with the budget director, controller, first selectman, and his chief of staff. We had been tracking certain numbers. A couple of things started to happen. Two major items. We had not looked at the Board of Education at all up until that point in time. And I went back to the Board of Education and said, where are you on a couple of different accounts? And not even really addressing where they are this year. We touched early at the beginning tonight on the private school transportation. They're fairly confident, and I am too, that they're going to be able to return slightly in excess of $100,000 on private school transportation. You see in this budget they have a reduction of $57,000, and that's after they even pay 3% more. And so that's the number, that's a pretty good number. Dr. Title has taken a stand, which I commend him on. The Board of Finance annually had given the Board of Education authority to encumber a number of purchase orders. This is a long-standing process that goes back through a couple of prior superintendents that Dr. Title does not like, very frankly. And I don't say you're going to stop it, but he has put a halt to it, and so they have promised to return to us in excess of $100,000 in those accounts. Yeah.
Through these items very clearly and very well, and I appreciate that. What I'm wondering about, I'm puzzled about is
What did we know and when did we know it?
Well, yeah, I don't want to put it that way. I don't want to ask it that way. But yes, I mean, if there's that kind of potential for reducing our expenses or increasing our revenue, wouldn't you have been aware of it at an earlier point in the process so that that last minute shuffle didn't take place?
Well, as I said,
that was quite an uproar.
and in full disclosure, we hadn't talked, and I talked to, Mrs. Munsell sat here tonight. I talked to Mrs. Munsell 3 or 4 times a week on various matters, but we hadn't talked on these matters, and I felt it incumbent upon me, because now I knew that we had to come in with something, and that was the first time on these matters that we had discussed it all. And I actually talked not to her directly. I went back to her afterwards and said, "Are you comfortable with this?" Because it was through her staff accountant that I got those numbers, and she confirmed that she was very comfortable with those numbers, and we hadn't looked at that at all. Additionally, the other big number that started to turn around very dramatically. We have started a process through the former tax collector for a tax sale. We've had reasonably good success on the early returns there. And so we're able to look at and really just predict as a result of that, and also taking the historical data on interest income for this, for delinquent taxes, and look as to what we've done in previous years. Say, here we are as of March 28th, and that was the date we did it. It was as of March 28th. This is what we've got. This is what we've booked today. What are we going to take in the next 90 days? What are we going to take in April, May, and June over and above what we've already got here? And that number added, and you can punch holes in it and say there's different ways to go about it. Yes, there's 100 different ways to go about it, but at least there was a rationale to this process, and we could say that we estimate that we are probably going to take in $235,000 more just on interest on delinquent taxes than we have in the current year's budget. That's a big number. So right there, on 3 lines, you had, well over half of the change from what we were previously anticipating.
And that all occurred on that day?
Those 3 things did, yeah.
Did you seek them at that time, or was this information that you would have,
No, I think,
it would have come
and
to
the
you?
other component on it is that we've had a number of vacancies, primarily as a result of some retirements that have occurred, and that have not been filled. They are in the process of being filled, but as those go along, that period stretches out longer. And we were able to, we were really able to begin to quantify department by department by department where these things are getting filled. Some of them are being filled next week, but they haven't been filled for the last 3 or 4 months, and that's money that's not going to get spent. And so we were able to look at that. That's money that's going to get spent next year, and that's money that's going to get spent in the second half of April, May, and June, but it's money that was not spent in January, February, and March.
Was your question answered?
No, but I won't keep asking.
We gotta move on. Retire medical.
And risk management. We did risk management. Retirement.
Risk management.
No, we covered the risk management.
We touched on basically with the Human Resources Department. That's that 500. What that covers are property claims, liability claims, for actions taken against the town. And we feel very comfortable with the levels that are there.
This is on which
On the risk management.
Why don't we just address the retired
Yeah.
If there's anything on retired medical.
That would really be the last.
Retiree medical, and this is the acronym for that, for those who are new, is OPEB, which stands for Other Post-Employment Benefits. You will find it on pages 288 and 289 of the budget book. Again, if you look at it, the town has a liability, as you can see there, of $102 million, which is a long-term liability of the town. 2 years ago, the board, this body established 2 irrevocable trusts, one for police and fire, and one for town employees who are covered under existing contractual agreements for retiree health care. In the case of the police and fire units, they are also making a contribution from their salaries for this benefit. What we asked our actuary to do is to apply the results of the pensions experience study to this fund. And the other side of it is within the ordinance adopted in 2009 by this body, we're required in this coming fiscal year to meet 100% of the ARC, or the annual recommended contribution. And this budget meets it. As you can see on page 288, the calculations there, with a total contribution of $8,647,000.
Use the mic.
I'm sorry, contribution of $8,647,000. I would tell you this, and I won't, given the hour, I don't want to get into lengthy detail. This does, if you look at the OPEB reports and the annual report of the town, that also includes, in those documents, liabilities which relate to the Board of Education. The town does not intend to fund those because they're on a pay-as-you-go basis, and though they do show up as a liability of the town, those funds are carried within the Board of Education budget.
So if I there's a history here where the police and fire department negotiated this benefit at some point, and then the rest of the town, and I'm just trying to get some historical perspective here, and then the rest of the town negotiated it in their own union contracts. But is it true that none of the other towns around us offer this post-retirement?
No, I think
it's not true.
We did a study. We did a study about 3 years ago. The Board of Finance paid for a study with, I think it was 8 other towns of similar size: City of Milford, West Hartford, Greenwich, Norwalk, Danbury. I forget Westport. They all offer something. We were considered one of the more generous plans as far as this is concerned, but not the most generous plan. Be happy to get you a copy of that report, because I think that the information is, though it's about 3 or 4 years old, it's not really stale information, because there hasn't been a great deal of movement on this. But I'd venture to say that a lot of the towns, not all, some have made changes. The town of Darien, for example, has made a change that no policeman hired after a period of time about 4 years ago gets retiree medical, period. It is not available in certain groups, and so there's a wide variety.
Essentially, they just move into Medicare after retirement.
Yeah.
Or after,
correct.
Appropriate yeah.
Correct, but everyone, Medicare, people are always looking for a Medicare supplement plan to supplement Medicare. And really what this does, at least on the town employee side, police and fire hired before 1986 are not Medicare, most of them are not Medicare eligible. So they don't have that. Town employees are responsible for Medicare A and B. And so this basically becomes the supplement plan for those retired individuals or potential retired individuals.
Okay. Yeah, thanks.
But I'd be happy to get
That'd be great if you could.
the report, which breaks it out into groups. And as I say, there are 8 towns within Connecticut, either similar in size or geography.
Right, because this is almost scarier than the pension, because the unpredictability of
Yeah,
healthcare costs.
and it is the investments in this plan, and there are right now, there's about between the 2 plans, there's roughly about $11 million that's invested currently, and that is professionally managed, and it is under the ordinance. It's under the control of the Joint Investment Board, Joint Investment Pension Boards, for investment purposes.
Thank you.
Okay, Paul, thank you. I think that covers everything.
Thank you. If you have any questions, I'll get some of that back to you.
Okay, thanks a lot.
Right.
I think we're done for the evening. Thank you, everybody, for your time. And we'll wrap it up. Thanks.